Chapter 966. The Dark Forest. Compared to the Sorcerer World, the Zambi's empire's exploitation of resources was still in a primitive state. As a result, most of the inner regions of the plain were undeveloped primeval forests or uncivilized regions. Places where humans could move about were surrounded by many dangerous creatures. The Dark Forest, at the western border of the empire, was one such region. There were many primeval creatures and terrifying magical beasts within the Dark Forest. They gathered there and multiplied, forming a unique and exclusive foreign world. This was a harsh problem that most plain worlds had to face. Survival of the fittest, the natural selection. Powerful magical beasts, with their powerful physiques and ferocious fighting styles, became the rulers of most regions. They fought for themselves, either in families, tribes, or alone. They occupied the regions with the richest minerals and plants on the continent. Compared to them, intelligent races like humans had no competitive edge. At the beginning of their existence, human beings did not have strong bodies, natural magic talent, and sharp teeth and claws. Therefore, they could only hug each other for warmth and struggle to survive in the gaps between the many savage ancient beasts and ferocious monsters. If it weren't for humanity's outstanding ability to learn and create, allowing them to learn some powerful and strange abilities from the magical creatures as their teachers and pass them down and strengthen them, it would have been almost impossible for humans to become the ruler of the plane. The first batch of sorcerers in the sorcerer world were ancient humans who imitated the natural magic patterns on powerful magical beasts and obtained some strange abilities. After tens of thousands of years of continuous accumulation and improvement, an effective sorcerer cultivation system was formed. It was precisely by relying on the sorcerers that the humans of the sorcerer world finally defeated all kinds of powerful magical beasts and became the largest race there. However, as the sorcerer community grew stronger day by day, they gradually grew into a new race that was completely different from ordinary humans. The development of planes was almost the same. The Invict plane was on the same path of development as the sorcerer's world, but the power system it evolved into was similar to the worship of the holy light, which was similar to the belief of the gods. Most of the humans in Invict worshipped the holy light, thus pushing a natural phenomenon that had no life and consciousness onto the altar. Faith was also a form of power. It was precisely because of the continuous faith of millions of Invict citizens that the holy light became a powerful and unparalleled power. At the very least, in the Invict dimension, this power had already been embedded in the dimension law, becoming an important pillar that supported the development and growth of the dimension's consciousness. With the blessing of the plane's consciousness, the power of the holy light pushed its devout believers to the peak of the plane's power. As long as the Invict plane continued on its current path, after thousands of years, there would eventually be one holy knight who would break through the shackles of the plane's power and become the first holy knight in the history of the Invict plane. And the moment he broke through, he would naturally become the first powerful god in the Invict plane who used holy light as his source of power. When that time comes, the Invict plane would finally have a firm foothold in the multiverse, having the cornerstone to expand and develop outward. Unfortunately, before the Invict plane could give birth to its own guardian god, the Deceit witches discovered it and broke in. Then, they built the witch tower in a place called the Dabri Highlands. From that moment onwards, Invict plane was in the countdown to being enslaved. It could be said that if there was no Ada, Holy Knight Kale's desperate struggle had destroyed the interplanar transmission circle in the witch tower. According to the invasion process of the Deception witches, Invict Bitwall would struggle for at most another 40 to 50 years before it would become a meal for the Deception witches and become a secondary Bitwall under their rule. And now, with the changes in the situation, the Holy Knights seemed to have gained a certain advantage. They had the opportunity to capture all the Deception witches and drive the forces of the evil sorcerers out of the Invict plane. Therefore, when there were signs of witch activity in the western part of the empire, the local Holy Light Chapel immediately sent out all their members to encircle and suppress the witch. They successfully trapped the witch in the Dark Forest. However, That witch's witchcraft ability was too strange. She could actually transform herself into any kind of creature and then gain their trust, turning them into her guardian beasts. A tier, 2 silver tier paladin was carelessly tricked into betraying the holy light and becoming a true dark paladin. And under the protection of this dark paladin, the witch successfully escaped into the dark forest, evading the search of the holy knights here. As time passed, there were already 2 tier, 3 gold paladins among the team of holy knights that gathered at the periphery of the dark forest, and as many as 21 tier, 2 silver paladins. But the person they were searching for was just an ordinary tier 2 witch. In a dark and damp, dense forest, Devin was carefully searching. In order to make it easier to fight and move, he took off his heavy metal armor and only wore a silver chain armor with a thick cloak draped over him. The greatsword that he was used to usually had also been replaced with a thin rapier, paired with a matte steel round shield. These were all the equipment he had. The dark forest lived up to its name. Tall, ancient trees propped up a huge canopy, blocking most of the light from the sky, making the forest deep and dark. Even in the daytime, the forest was gloomy, and it was hard to see the sun. And in such a claustrophobic environment, there were indescribably terrifying magical plants that grew and multiplied. They were mixed together with ordinary green plants, and unless one was a knowledgeable or experienced hunter, it would be difficult to identify them. And if an ordinary person approached them without any precautions, they would be dragged into the magical plant full of activated thorns by the vines, pierced by sharp thorns or branches, and then killed by having their flesh and blood sucked dry. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, as a tier 2 silver tier paladin, Devin did not cast any holy light protection on himself. Instead, he relied on his sharp reflexes and swift sword to eliminate the magical creatures and magical plants that tried to attack him. The holy light that the holy knights mastered was good at buffing, healing, and purifying, but it was not good at scouting and searching. So in this dark forest, Devin needed to rely on the strength of his own swordsmanship and not the overly dazzling holy light. The dark forest was silent. The magical creatures and beasts that lived in this forest, as long as they had not grown to an unparalleled level, needed to learn how to be quiet. They completed the whole process of hunting, reproducing, and resting in silence. Even at the last moment before death, they had to keep quiet as much as possible. Sound would bring them enemies, and so would the overly dazzling holy light. The first few groups of holy knights that entered the dark forest to search were not small in size, and there were even high-ranked holy knights leading them. But because they were too ostentatious, they ended up suffering heavy losses. The beasts and magical creatures that were hiding in the dark forest seemed to be extremely repulsive towards outsiders. They were easily attracted by the sound and light emitted by the groups, and thus secretly attacked the holy knights. At the end of the day, the holy knights were just a group of human warriors that had been strengthened by the holy light. If they were fighting on flat ground, with their enhanced strength and physique, they could easily crush magical creatures of the same tier. However, in the pitch-black dark forest, the combat power of the holy knights would inevitably be greatly reduced. The long-distance trekking and crossing the forest made it impossible for them to wear thick and dense metal armor, and thus they could not defend against the sudden poison attack from the withered leaves or vines. The overgrown shrubs and spiderweb-like vines and thorns made it impossible for them to wield the one-handed sword that they were used to. Even if they switched to thin swords or short swords, they would not be able to smoothly cut the neck of powerful magical creatures. Therefore, the few groups of holy knights that went deep into the dark forest all returned in low spirits, losing many black iron knights. Therefore, the 2 golden knights had no choice but to scatter the many silver knights into the forest, carefully searching for the whereabouts of the evil witch and the defected knight. As long as they found their traces and reported back to the camp in time, the 2 golden knights will be able to lead a large number of holy knights to rush over and end the search operation with the lowest cost. Night fell. As the sky darkened, the dark forest became more and more unfathomable. Devon stepped on the slightly slippery and sticky soil, quietly wandering in the depths of the forest. Every time he stepped on the ground, he was very careful. If it wasn't the exposed soil, it was the pile of rotten leaves. He almost never stepped on the thorns and branches. On one hand, it was very likely that it was a trap disguised by the magical plants. On the other hand, if he stepped on the withered branches, it would make unnecessary sounds and attract the attention of the dark creatures. Apart from paying attention to where he stepped, Devon had to constantly scan the green vines that hung down from the tall ancient trees. Many of them were actually blood-sucking vines in disguise. There were also many poisonous snakes and leeches that liked to crawl on the vines. When someone passed by, they would silently climb onto the body of the other party. Therefore, Devon carefully moved forward while quickly waving the thin sword in his hand. Under the swift slashes of the sword, the blood-sucking vines were cut off one by one, and purplish-black blood with a fishy smell splashed all over the sky. One by one, the heads of the patched snakes and iron-striped snakes were chopped off. Their long and powerful bodies twisted and twitched violently, stirring up a mess in the surroundings. But at this moment, Devon suddenly stopped, raising his nose and lightly sniffing. There was a thick, rotten, and moldy smell in the humid air, mixed with a hint of a woman's body fragrance. There was also the strange sound of splashing water. Chapter 9:67. This was a small pool in the depths of the jungle, and it was the only source of water for dozens of miles. However, at this moment, it was occupied by a youthful and beautiful figure. The sound of splashing water was coming from here. A naked, beautiful woman was standing in the waist-deep pool of water, gently cupping the water with her hands and splashing it on her body. This small pool of water was less than 20 square meters, and the water was not deep. It was dark green in color, and the swaying water completely covered the woman below her waist, revealing only her infinitely beautiful upper body. Her slender and soft waist, her shockingly large curves, and her smooth and delicate neck and back were all so eye-catching, giving off a soul-stirring and shocking beauty. The other party seemed to be unaware of Devon's approach, and was still gently cupping the water, rubbing her plump and beautiful chest. Devon gently squatted down, using the lush shrubs to cover his body, slightly narrowing his eyes and slowly scanning the surroundings of the pool. On a boulder east of the pool, Devon saw a pile of scattered clothes and ornaments, as well as a bulging waist pouch and a belt filled with various colored reagent bottles. But looking around, he could not find the figure of the traitor who had left the holy light and entered the embrace of darkness. Was it a trap, or was the enemy careless? He had no idea. However, in front of him was indeed a rare opportunity to attack. The other party's naked body was 4 to 5 steps away from his equipment. If he suddenly attacked, it was very likely that he would seriously injure the other party, or even directly kill her. Devon's heart could not help but thump. Should he carefully retreat and pass on the information of the witch's location, or should he directly attack? For a moment, he was somewhat hesitant. At this moment, a rustling sound suddenly came from the jungle opposite the pool, and a deer jumped out of the bushes, curiously observing the witch in the pool. The beautiful witch seemed to be startled by this sudden visitor as well. Immediately after, a charming chuckle appeared on her face. She muttered a few strange syllables that no one could understand and gently waved her hands. Suddenly, 2 green ribbons stretched out from the edge of the pool and wrapped around the deer before it could run away in fear. Slowly, she pulled it towards the witch. What a great opportunity! The other party was casting evil witchcraft, and the target was not him. Devon no longer hesitated. The surging power of holy light surged in his body, and under his rapid chanting, it quickly transformed into dazzling buffs. The seal of justice, power blessing, divine protection, just judgment, divine impact. In order to maximize the lethality of the surprise attack, apart from divine protection, which is a defensive buff, the other buffs either increase strength, agility, or divine attack. Devon, a Tier 2 Silver Tier Knight, only needed 2 or 3 fingers to complete a full set of holy light blessings, thanks to his powerful instincts that had been honed through decades of hardships. His own strength was also growing exponentially under the impetus of the powerful holy light. Devon originally only had 21 points of physical strength, but now, with the +3 strength buff of the Tier 2 Power Blessing, it quickly rose to 24 points. Then, with the +1 strength buff of the Seal of Justice, his physical strength skyrocketed to 25 points. This kind of physical strength was not inferior to most Tier 2 magical beasts. His agility, vitality, and spirit also increased by different degrees under the multiple buffs of the Holy Light. If before the buffs, his physical strength could only be considered as a Tier 2 beginner, then now, his strength had skyrocketed to at least a Tier 2 advanced, a whole 2 ranks higher. However, the only flaw was that he did not wear the holy armor, and he did not use the one-handed greatsword that he was best at. But with the ultimate strength and the extension of the holy light, the rapier in his hand could also unleash a terrifying killing power. Just when the beautiful witch realized something was wrong and turned her head back, Devon leaped out and cast the charged skill in the air. His whole body carried the dazzling holy light and turned into a light sword. As fast as lightning, he rushed towards the defenseless witch 20 meters away. The witch's charming and delicate face looked so twisted and horrified under the dazzling holy light. She retreated with all her might and swept up 2 water pillars that shot up to the sky to collide with the holy sword that was stabbing towards her. Die, girl! Devon's body slid across the surface of the pool like a sharp arrow. The rapier in his hand was immersed in a dense milky white light, and in an instant, it was only half a meter away from the witch's smooth neck. However, at this moment, a pitch-black, lightless greatsword suddenly reached out from the surging pool water, swiftly stabbing into Devon's exposed abdomen from below. The holy protection on the surface of his body seemed to have no protection in front of this strange black greatsword. It was stabbed, and the hilt was almost gone. The horrifying sharp tip of the sword penetrated Devon's body and came out from his back, bringing with it a large splash of blood. As Devon slid forward at lightning speed, the long sword effortlessly cut him in half from his chest down with his strength. His chest and abdomen were cut in half, and the steaming organs inside slid out in an instant, splashing on the green pool water. Suffering such a heavy injury, Devon's charging body tilted, and he crashed into a pile of rocks on the other side of the pool. With the protection of the powerful holy light, even though he suffered such a great injury, he still retained a trace of life and looked back at the black sword with difficulty. The pool water parted, and a tall black figure rose from it. Seeing the familiar standard armor and the strange long sword attached with dark energy, Devon cursed traitor in his heart and could no longer hold on. He tilted his head and died on the spot. Rena had already returned to the shore, naked, gently pressing her neck with her hand. There, a dark red line of blood slowly flowed out, looking very terrifying. Damn it, you should have done it earlier. Rena screamed angrily. That guy almost beheaded me. In order to lure the enemy to the greatest extent, Rena really didn't use any protection spells just now. If she hadn't moved quickly and dodged the sharpness of the rapier, perhaps it would have ended in a lose-lose situation. The tall figure shrouded in dark energy seemed to be unaware of the witch's rebuke. He slowly walked out of the pool, gently brushing off the pieces of flesh and blood that fell from his body, and stared coldly at the naked witch. Seeing the abnormality of the other party, the anger on Rena's face instantly disappeared, replaced by a gentle look. She didn't put on her clothes and just gracefully walked to the side of the tall figure, gently stroking the cold, hard helmet of the other party, and said with a tender smile, "What? Are you still angry with me? Don't tell me that after becoming a Dark Knight, you don't feel the sense of fullness of strength? This is countless times stronger than when you were a believer of the Holy Light. You should have felt it. The so-called power of the Holy Light is after all borrowed, and this power truly belongs to you." As a deception witch, every word that Rena spat out while clinging to the tall figure could silently arouse a trace of strange magic fluctuations. After hearing these words, The hatred and pain in the eyes of the tall black shadow weakened. "Let's leave quickly." After a moment, the tall figure finally said coldly, "I can feel the holy light in the distance moving restlessly. They already know of Devon's death. What about the 2 grade 3 knights?" Rena obviously only feared the high-ranked knight and didn't care about the holy knights of the same rank. "One is still at the edge of the forest. The other is already approaching us and will probably arrive in half an hour. Then let's go quickly." Hearing that a grade 3 gold knight had arrived, Rena immediately panicked. She hurriedly put on her clothes and simply searched Devon's body before leading the dark knight into the depths of the forest. Half an hour later, a group of holy knights carefully groped their way here and found the horrifying corpse of their comrade by the side of the pool. A middle-aged man with a calm expression and a resolute expression crouched beside Devon's corpse that had almost been cut in half. He used his hand to rub the blood that had not completely congealed, and his face finally showed an unconcealable expression of anger. Devon's corpse still had a thick aura of darkness, and it was obvious that he had been killed by the traitor who had devoted himself to darkness. And yet, the other party did not care about old ties and used such a cruel method to kill his former comrade. This was simply infuriating. "You guys bring Devon's corpse back. I'll go after them." The middle-aged golden knight suddenly stood up. "They haven't gone far." With that, he did not wait for the dozen holy knights beside him to persuade him. He pulled out his great sword and rushed into the dense forest in the distance. With the opposition of the holy light and the dark aura that the other party had left in the air had not completely dissipated, they could forget about escaping his courageous pursuit. The dense forest flashed before his eyes. The path in front of them was completely blocked by branches and dense shrubs. Kenneth had already lost the cautiousness and calmness that a holy knight should have. He did not care about the branches and bushes blocking his way, relying on the holy armor and the protection of the holy light to barge through, letting the branches scratch and lash at his body. Only when he encountered thorny vines that were too difficult to pass through would he flash his sword and use the violent holy light slash to carve out a rugged path in the forest. Chapter 968. After chasing for tens of miles, Kenneth caught up to Rena in a clearing in the forest. After all, Rena was only a grade 2, which relied on her bloodline, potions, and resources. She usually lived like a princess and had never truly experienced a life-and-death battle. Hence, she was not resolute in moving and seemed to be too sloppy. By the time the Dark Knight noticed the enemy approaching, with Rena's physique, there was no way she could outrun an enraged Golden Knight. Looking back, she saw the Golden Knight's body overflowing with dazzling radiance as he sprinted. Rena could not help but panic and cower. She stealthily took out a small reagent bottle from her bosom, opened it, and quickly chanted a strange witchcraft incantation. A pitch-black three-tailed scorpion crawled out of the small reagent bottle. Its 3 tails stood up high and shot a gray ray at the tall Dark Knight. The Dark Knight's body suddenly froze. "Go! Keep him busy for me." Rena hurriedly gave the Dark Knight the order to die and ran forward madly. The tall Dark Knight's face under the mask showed a trace of despair, hatred, and relief. He pulled out the large sword at his waist and turned around to face the Golden Knight who was charging at him at high speed. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Even though he knew that he was committing suicide, under the control of that damned witch's strange spell, the Dark Knight still gathered a dense and evil aura of darkness and slashed at the front of the light barrier that the Golden Knight had condensed while charging at high speed. A dull thud sounded. The power of darkness and the power of holy light collided. Light and darkness intertwined and annihilated each other, and the 2 swords collided, creating dazzling sparks. After all, the Dark Knight had just fallen and was not familiar with his control of the power of darkness. He was sent flying as if he was hit by a charging elephant and crashed into countless bushes and brambles. Finally, he was embedded in the trunk of a tall ancient tree. With such a simple collision, The power of darkness on his body was directly dispersed by the opponent. All the bones and internal organs in his body were shaken to the point that they were soft and brittle. If it were not for the armor on his body that had dissipated nearly half of the force, he would probably have been killed on the spot by the power of the Golden Knight. However, even though this was the case, he already lost the strength to resist. His entire body was embedded into the tree trunk, and with a slight struggle, purplish-black blood with a fishy stench flowed out from the broken armor. The Tier 2 Dark Knight's berserk attack had shaken Kenneth to some extent. However, as a holy knight, with the blessing and protection of the holy light, this insignificant damage was negated with just 2 flicks of his fingers. Kenneth arrived before the Dark Knight and used the tip of his sword to pry open his visor, revealing the pale, gloomy face of a young man. "Ash, Darwin, why did you fall?" The tip of Kenneth's sword trembled. Darwin was an elite that the Holy Light Chapel had carefully selected and nurtured. Despite his young age, he had already become a Grade 2 Silver Knight. As long as he did not make any mistakes, he would definitely have the chance to become a revered Grade 3 Gold Knight in another 30 to 40 years. After hearing that an evil which had appeared near the chapel, it was Kenneth who personally ordered Ash to go after the enemy. This was also Kenneth's good intentions. As long as Ash performed well in this operation, he would definitely receive more feedback from the Holy Light. If Darwin could perform well in this operation to kill the witches, he would definitely get more feedback from the Holy Light. Perhaps, after this operation was successful, he would have the qualifications to host a Holy Light Chapel in a certain region. Perhaps, after the success of this operation, he would be qualified to preside over a Holy Light Chapel in a certain region. Unfortunately, his fate underwent an unbelievable reversal after he met that evil witch. Under the enticement and help of that evil witch, he actually fell into the embrace of darkness and became the enemy of the Holy Light. Under the temptation and help of that evil witch, he actually turned into the embrace of darkness and became the enemy of Holy Light. What else could make Kenny angrier and crazier than this? That was why Kenneth was in a hurry to catch him and ask him why with his own mouth. However, this fallen Ash Darwin did not say a word. His eyes were lifeless, and wisps of dark aura floated out from his pupils. He looked as though he had lost his mind. The sword in Kenneth's hand trembled slightly. There were a few times when he wanted to cut off Darwin's head, but he could not bear to do so. Finally, a sharp glint flashed in his eyes, and he chopped off Darwin's legs. He then picked up the sword that was shrouded in dark aura and pierced through Darwin's right shoulder, nailing him to a tree trunk. After doing all this, Kenneth did not stay any longer. His eyes drifted towards the direction that the evil which had escaped to, and he chased after her with all his might. It had to be said that as a Grade 2 witch, Raina was really useless. The Dark Knight had bought her 3 minutes of time, but she still could not escape from Kenneth's pursuit. She did not know how to hide her tracks, and did not know how to avoid Kenneth's pursuit. In the dark forest, Raina only managed to escape for 5 miles before Kenneth caught up to her. This time, there was no one who could help her. Kenneth forcefully withstood Raina's spells and rushed to her side. He used the back of his sword to whip her back and completely knocked her down. He searched Raina's body for bottles and strange ornaments, and broke the tendons in her limbs. Kenneth then grabbed her long hair and dragged her back. There were almost no paths in the dark forest, and Kenneth had specially chosen the areas with the densest thorns. As a result, Raina's body was covered in hundreds and thousands of bloody wounds. By the time they arrived in front of the withered ancient tree, Raina's clothes had already been torn to shreds, revealing a beautiful body that was covered in cuts and bruises. Kenneth suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at the empty ancient tree. The sword was still there, but where was Ike, who had lost both her legs and all her bones? Darwin had mysteriously disappeared. Not only was he gone, but the 2 severed legs were also gone. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Kenneth pinned Raina to the ancient tree and quickly circled around it a few times. With his rich experience in tracking, Kenneth was confident that Ike did not leave on her own. Darwin didn't leave on his own, but was rescued by an outsider. Not only was this person powerful, he also had a special method of concealment. Otherwise, he would not have left no traces behind. A witch's companion? Kenneth grabbed Raina and raised her in front of his eyes, glaring at her fiercely. Speak. Are there any other companions here? Ike, who saved Darwin? Since she had fallen into the hands of a gold knight, and her spine had been broken, she naturally did not have the strength to resist. She raised her horrifying face that was covered in blood and scratches, and cursed at the holy knight in front of her. Let me go, let me go. If you kill me, my companion will definitely avenge me. Before she could finish, Raina was slapped twice by Kenneth. Her face was bruised, and half of her teeth were loose. I don't want to hear another word from you. Speak. Who are your companions? Where are they hiding? If you tell me, I'll give you a quick death. If not, you can just wait to be bathed in holy light. Raina's mind was instantly destroyed by the enemy's viciousness. She no longer had the arrogance and ruthlessness from before, and her entire body was trembling. It's gone, it's really gone. There were a total of 3 of us this time. There was an accident when we passed through the spatial crack, and we were separated. Where did those 2 guys go? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm here to deliver the materials for the spell formation. They were swept to some corner of this plane by the void hurricane. I really don't know. There was a divine spell in the holy light that could detect lies. After confirming that the witch in front of him was not lying, Kenneth gave up on interrogating her. Since they weren't the witch's companions, they were most likely native to the dark forest. Ike, Darwin's aura of darkness was very compatible with this place. Could they have been eaten by a passing monster or brought back to their lair? After pondering for a long time without an answer, Kenneth finally gave up on searching for Ike's whereabouts. He grabbed the captured witch and sprinted out of the forest with large strides. When his figure completely disappeared into the dense forest, a pale human face suddenly appeared on the trunk of the ancient tree with the black sword stuck in it, staring at the place where the golden knight had disappeared. After blinking a few times, the face opened its mouth wide and actually spat out Ike from the tree trunk. Darwin spat it out. At this moment, the 2 severed legs of the other party had miraculously reconnected back together. It took a lot of effort. Ike, Darwin crawled up from the wet ground, silently staring at the face. Ever since he fell into the embrace of darkness, he felt as if his soul was covered by a thin veil. What he saw, heard, and thought were completely different from before. The face in front of him gave him a strange feeling that he was the same kind of person. That little witch is quite capable. She actually managed to awaken your latent darkness talent. This is a good thing for me. I actually picked up a dark knight with good potential in this inferior plane. Good. Come with me. After saying that, the ancient tree's face suddenly opened its mouth wide and actually opened up a void passage that led to an unknown, mysterious space. That Iku's mind had yet to recover. Darwin only hesitated for a moment before he once again entered the dark passage and completely disappeared from Invic's plane. Kenneth, who had already left, naturally had no idea what was happening behind him. Chapter 969. Hasi City. It wasn't the harvest season yet, but the citizens of Hasi City were as excited and happy as if they were celebrating a festival. When the paladins in bright armor and dignified bearing escorted the rattling wooden cage through the streets, the entire city boiled over. Witches. So this was a witch. Ever since the otherworld witches invaded Invic Plain, the Zambies Empire had been plagued by witches. They plundered mines and seized high-level resources, treating the entire Invic Plain as their own backyard and doing whatever they wanted. Sometimes, to punish places that refused them entry, they would even release a plague there, not caring about the casualties of the common people. It was the horrendous crimes they committed over the past 100 years that made the citizens of Zambies hate these foreign witches to the bone. Their hearts were filled with endless hatred. Hence, when the paladins, who were the embodiment of light and justice, successfully captured the terrifying witch from the dark forest and stuffed her into the wooden cage of the prison carriage, the citizens of Hasi City flooded the streets, using tattered vegetable leaves, cold, dirty water, and sharp stones to welcome the arrival of the witch. The people chased after the carriage, cheering and leaping, throwing stones at the trembling witch who hid in the wooden cage. It could be seen that this witch was once an exceptionally beautiful woman, with an impressive figure and a delicate and perfect face. Unfortunately, the deep-rooted hatred caused her to suffer at the hands of the paladins. Now, she was locked in a cage like a beast, being cursed, attacked, and humiliated by the common people. The extreme pain and fear of death caused Rena to lose her previous glamorous, charming, and graceful appearance. His hair was disheveled, and his robe had been torn into shreds, unable to cover his body at all. His exposed skin was covered in dense scratches and bruises. His once smooth and white skin had already begun to wither. Wrinkles and scabs appeared on his skin like the bark of a dead tree. Rena's hair was disheveled, her expression numb as she scanned the cheering crowd around the wooden cage. She allowed the tattered vegetable leaves and sharp stones to hit her, but she didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. Burn her to death, send her to the stake. Every time a similar shout erupted from the crowd, Rena's body couldn't help but twitch violently. Her heart was filled with hatred, and her heart was filled with boundless hatred. Unfortunately, her wrists and ankles were shackled with terrifying magic shackles. The shackles were made of special magic metals and were very difficult to be destroyed by corrosive spells such as acid. At the inner edge of the shackles, there were countless fine metal spikes that pierced into the skin and flesh. Even the slightest movement would cause excruciating pain. A special mask was placed on Rena's face, and an egg-sized metal walnut was stuffed into her mouth. With this, even if there were no guards, Rena would lose the ability to chant incantations and use hand gestures to guide the casting of spells. As for those instant cast low-level spells, they couldn't be used in this wooden cage that was filled with all kinds of strange runes. Although Invic Plain was a low-magic world, the research on magic had not been relaxed at all. This kind of anti-magic barrier that used holy light as a source of power was still something they could research. Rena's cage was directly sent to the Chapel of Holy Light in Hezath City. There, more and more holy knights rushed over from all directions, and there were as many as 5 grade 3 gold knights. Of course, so many gold knights weren't there to guard a rookie, who was only grade 2, but to protect the core materials of the spell formation that had been found on Rena's body. The attack on the Witch Tower in Dabry Highland had lasted for half a year. Although the Zambez Empire had suffered heavy losses, the witches were also at the end of their tether. Based on the current situation, as long as the allied Holy Knights, who had the backing of a powerful empire, gritted their teeth and weren't afraid of the necessary sacrifices, they could break through the Witch Tower in another 3 to 4 months. If the Witch Tower obtained this batch of spell formation materials at this time, and repair the interplanar teleportation spell formation inside, it would mean that the huge casualties that the Zambez Empire had suffered over the past year would have been in vain. That was why the Holy Knights and the Empire's allied army sent back 3 powerful gold knights to join forces with the other Holy Knights in Hezath City to protect the witch and the materials for the magic circle. As for the Tier 4 Holy Knight, Ader, who was currently heading to the Empire's northern region, Carly also began to head west to meet up with the Holy Knights of Hezath City. Once they had a grade 4 Holy Knight to hold the line, they would be able to spare enough manpower to escort the witches and materials back to the Imperial capital. Only in the Imperial capital would there be no need to worry about safety. Therefore, on the 3rd day after which Rena was brought into Hezath City, 7 days before the grade 4 paladin would arrive, Grim disguised himself and sneaked into Hezath City. Currently, Hezath City was in a state of martial law. The Holy Light Chapel was tightly guarded by holy knights from all directions. The Hezath City guards were responsible for the security and inspection of the outer perimeter. However, there were still small teams of holy knights holding the fort at key locations such as the city gates and mountain passes. In order to prevent the witches' companions from sneaking into Hezath City, military control had been implemented. The inspection of entering and exiting the city gates was extremely strict. Ordinary merchants and caravans were not allowed to enter and could only rest in the nearby towns. Grim, who had just heard the news from the Dark Forest, had no choice but to kill a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight on his way. He then put on the standard Holy Knight armor, rode a tall horse, and swaggered to the gate of Hezath City. Seeing Grim's signature Holy Knight armor, the city guards who were strictly inspecting the passers-by at the gate immediately saluted him. Some of them even ran to inform the Holy Knights station here. A few moments later, 3 Holy Knights rushed out of the gate with a dozen apprentice knights and quickly walked up to Grim's horse. "May the light be with us. My brother from afar. May I know which chapel you're from?" The 3 paladins in the lead were all Grade 1 Black Iron Knights. The one in the lead was a middle-aged man with sideburns all over his face. He kowtowed towards Grim enthusiastically. Grim jumped off his horse and kowtowed in return. "May the light be with us. Greetings, my name is Yedric, and I'm from Baldan City at the edge of the Avali Mountains. I'm currently traveling near the Dark Forest. I heard that Hezath City is gathering the power of the Holy Light, so I came here in hopes of contributing my meager strength." "Ah, so you're from the Avali Mountains. I was wondering why you looked so unfamiliar. Welcome, brother. Hezath City welcomes you." The leading Holy Knight smiled. "My name is Halite, and I'm on duty at the city gates today." "Oh, I remember that the one in charge of Baldan is old Christopher. We've even had a drink together before. How is he? How is he now?" Grim shook his head and smiled. "Sir Christopher is too old. He returned to his hometown of Winterspring 5 years ago. The one in charge of everything in Baldan is a Lambman Greythorn. Lord Greythorn. However, 7 months ago, he also brought a large number of brothers to Dapir. Grim had long since obtained crucial information from the memory fragments of the Holy Knight he killed. So how could he be deceived by the other party's words? With just a few words, he dispelled the other party's suspicions and put them at ease. After sending Grim into the city, the leading Holy Knight smiled regretfully. "I'm sorry, brother. This is as far as I can send you. I still need to receive the Holy Light brothers from all over the world. Let Todi bring you to the chapel. When you get there, you need to report to Garrison Officer Ancila. He'll assign you a specific task." The 2 kowtowed once more, and Grim was led by a novice knight, Todi, to the tallest and most majestic Holy Light chapel in the city. Although Hezath City was under martial law, there were still nearly 60,000 residents in the city. The streets were bustling with people, and the atmosphere was no less lively than usual. However, when they saw the 2 Holy Knights in bright armor walk past them, all the residents moved to the side of the road and bowed to them. Grim could tell that they truly admired and respected the believers who represented the power of the Holy Light. Their respect was not forced at all. It came from the bottom of their hearts, from the bottom of their hearts. From this, it could be seen that the mysterious power of the Holy Light had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, becoming the embodiment of light and justice. The sincere admiration and respect from the people stimulated the novice knight Todi's sense of professional honor. He walked beside Grim, his young face filled with unconcealable excitement. When he peeked at Grim's exquisite armor, his gaze became even more passionate and envious. As an apprentice knight, Todi was only wearing ordinary steel armor. There were no complicated and exquisite light runes engraved on it. Holy Knights above Grade 1 all wore holy armor that contained the power of the Holy Light. Whenever they gathered the power of the Holy Light, the holy armor would fuse with the power of the Holy Light and form a kind of holy light protection. According to Grimm's tests, a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight's holy light protection could defend against around 140 degrees of elemental magic damage. When Grimm was still a Tier 1 sorcerer, the strongest single-target fireball he could conjure only had a fireball of 115 degrees. This meant that a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight could completely withstand Grimm's fireball, rush to his side, and cut him down. Of course, Grim could only cast a Grade 1 fireball for 3 seconds at most. Therefore, if a Grade 1 wizard fought against a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight, the Holy Knight would undoubtedly have the upper hand in a narrow room. Chapter 970. Garrison Officer Ancilla's room was on the left side of the Holy Light Chapel's training camp. It was a simple wooden hut. When Grimm was led into the hut by Toady, Garrison Officer Ancilla was fighting hard against the pile of documents on his desk that almost reached the ceiling. Hearing the sound of someone entering, Ancilla raised his head and stared blankly at the two. After a long while, his eyes regained focus. He was a grade 2 Silver Knight. Although his physique had deteriorated due to his long hours of work, and he had a big belly, the holy light radiating from his body was a real grade 2 knight. Report. Respected Garrison Officer Ancilla, Apprentice Knight Toady has been ordered to. The young knight stood at attention and reported loudly. Unfortunately, he was interrupted by the impatient garrison officer before he could finish his sentence. All right. Toady, you have to come here at least 3 times a day. You may not be tired of these boring honorifics, but I'm tired of it. Also, remember to praise the holy light before you speak next time. Yes, garrison officer. All right, you may return to your post. I will personally receive this holy light, brother. Yes, garrison officer. After standing at attention again, Toady turned around and left the hut. The garrison officer Anselm also couldn't help but look at Grimm. May the light be with us. Respected garrison officer, how do you do? My name is... Grimm did not dare to be careless and immediately reported to Ancilla according to the Holy Knight's etiquette. Of course, his words were the same as before. In this foreign world where the flow of information was not complete, Grimm was not worried that his lies would be seen through by the enemy. Moreover, with Sodden's divine ring, Grimm could easily convert his elemental energy into pure light elements. As long as he did not make a move, it would not be a problem to hide from these holy knights. To be honest, none of the holy knights would have thought that a wizard from another world would be able to sneak into their ranks. After all, the holy light was a product of the power of faith, and it was one of the powers that wizards hated the most. The garrison officer was naturally happy to see this young knight, who came from afar and was willing to give his all for the holy light. Although in a few days, the legendary Lord Kali would soon arrive, but before that, Hezath City was still in great danger. It was said that Hawkins City, the core city of the northern part of the empire, had been destroyed by a wizard invasion. 2 Tier 3 sorcerers, a man and a woman, had invaded Hawkins City and started a fight. They had even summoned a large number of terrifying flaming creatures. Even with the protection of a powerful Tier 3 Golden Knight, Hawkins City still fell to the enemy. With the death of the Grade 3 Knight, Hawkins City was reduced to rubble. In this battle alone, close to 200 holy knights perished in the sea of fire, their souls returning to the embrace of the holy light. The entire Holy Knights Northern Division was heavily damaged. Without hundreds of years of recuperation, it would be difficult for it to recover to its original scale and quality. And the shock it brought to the Zambi's empire was no less than the first invasion of the evil witches 100 years ago. With Hawkins City as an example, no holy knight dared to say that the Chapel of Light was absolutely safe, especially when the witches and the materials for the spell formation were transported to Hezath City. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Worried that Hezath City would suffer the same fate as Hawkins City, the Holy Light Commander and the garrison officers all sent out a call to the surrounding chapels, calling for them to come and protect the land of glory of the Holy Light. In just a short time, the Hezath Chapel of Light was overcrowded with people. After briefly explaining the situation here to Grimm, Ancilla apologetically asked him to temporarily stay in a hotel near the Chapel of Light. All the accommodation and food expenses would be paid for by the chapel. Of course, Grimm understood such a rude request and happily agreed. And so, under the protection of 2 guards sent by Ancilla, Grimm successfully moved into a large hotel that was only 2 streets away from the Chapel of Light. Here, Grimm met with the paladins from the cities around Seath. Of course, they were all Tier 1 Black Iron Knights. Even if the living facilities in the Chapel of Light were insufficient, it was still possible to squeeze some space for the Tier 2 Silver Knights. Therefore, Almost all the Black Iron Knights were assigned to the outside of the Chapel of Light. If this was any other country, the Holy Knights would have long been dissatisfied with the difference in treatment. However, these Holy Knights were true believers of the Holy Light. None of them cared about the difference in treatment. Instead, they gathered together and discussed the possible evil sorcerer. When all kinds of Black Iron Knights gathered together, there would always be some who were especially well informed. Therefore, many people would gather around them to listen to them talk about the stories that happened in the northern part of the empire. Balrog, fire giant, mechanical witch, fire creature, giant dragon. Any one of the bizarre story elements could make these Black Iron Knights feel a sense of danger, not to mention that they converged in the same place at the same time. No matter how great a city was, no matter how many holy knights were guarding it, if they were to encounter such a powerful evil sorcerer, they would inevitably become a sacrificial offering. Unless they had a guardian like a Tier 4 Holy Knight, the Holy Knights would have to pay an unimaginable sacrifice if they wanted to defeat such an evil sorcerer. While they were chatting, Grimm inadvertently obtained an extremely valuable piece of information. A Tier 4 Holy Knight was rushing here from the north. It was estimated that he would arrive in Hazeth City in 7 to 8 days. This piece of information was spread by the high-ranking knights of the Holy Light Chapel to reassure the Black Iron Knights. However, they never imagined that the terrifying fire sorcerer would infiltrate their ranks and obtain this extremely valuable piece of strategic information. With Grimm's strength, could he fight against a Tier 4 Holy Knight? What a joke! If the news said that the Tier 4 Holy Knight would arrive in Hazeth City tomorrow, then Grimm would definitely leave tonight without any hesitation. Coming to Invict Plain was only to complete a mission. Grimm didn't want to risk his precious life for it. The reason why Grimm was so unrestrained and devoted to the battle in Hazeth City was because there was no one there that could threaten his life. Even if he was besieged by several Tier 3 Holy Knights, Grimm was confident that he could escape with his own strength. It was precisely because of this confidence that he chose to put everything on the line in order to obtain the most benefits in the short term. After hearing so much fragmented information today, Grimm pieced it all together and came to a conclusion that made him feel slightly afraid. That Tier 4 Holy Knight had suddenly appeared in the north. It was very likely that he had come to kill Sher Foam. However, after he left Hazeth City, he was chased by a group of wizard hunters. In order to avoid being hunted down, Grimm suddenly thought of escaping for 1,000 miles, which coincidentally allowed him to avoid the blade of the Tier 4 Holy Knight. He wondered if those fellows who were chasing him were still in the north. If they had hesitated for even a moment and remained there, they might have run into that Tier 4 paladin. Although wizards had always looked down on warriors and knights, they still had to pay a certain amount of respect to high-grade warriors. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. The situation in Hazeth City had already been investigated. The person who had fallen into the hands of the Holy Knights was none other than Witch Rena, who had entrusted him to protect. As for the materials needed to repair the teleportation spell formation, they had also fallen into the hands of the Holy Knights. Faced with such a situation, even Grimm could not help but scratch his head. He had to save her. However, how and who to save was a matter of great importance. If he could only choose between the two, Grimm would undoubtedly choose to snatch the materials for the teleportation spell formation. Only by sending the materials and resources to the Witch Tower and having them repair the teleportation spell formation would he have a chance to return to the Magus world. As for Rena, if he was lucky, he would save her. If the risk was too great, he would just treat it as if she was already dead. Therefore, the most important thing now was to understand the situation inside the Holy Light Chapel, where Rena was being held and where the materials were stored. Before obtaining detailed information, Grimm could only choose to lie low and silently gather information. However, passively waiting was never in Grimm's character. Before the Holy Knight appeared in Hazeth City, he had to carry out a rescue operation. Otherwise, once the Holy Knight arrived, the higher-ups of Hazeth City would definitely hand over the materials to him for safekeeping. At that time, No matter how bold Grimm was, he would not dare to rob a grade 4 Holy Knight. Time was of the essence, and he did not have the luxury of slowly infiltrating the Holy Light Chapel. As such, Grimm had already begun his operation on the outskirts of Hazeth City the night he arrived. Before entering the city, Remy, the plague spirit, was left alone by Grimm. The current plague poison spirit was completely different from before. With his grade 3 strength, he had the power to protect himself. The resonance between their souls allowed him to maintain a mysterious and subtle soul connection with Grimm, even though he was thousands of miles away. Therefore, Grimm, who was in Hazeth City, only needed to use his soul to send an order to Remy, who was hiding outside the city. And so, a sudden plague swept through the outskirts of Hazeth City. Chapter 9:71. The outbreak of the plague outside the city made the situation even more critical. Initially, the higher-ups of the city had only guessed that the witch's companions would come to her rescue, but now it had become a bloody reality. In just one night, more than a dozen cities had been infected by the plague. The disease was so ferocious and contagious that the higher-ups of the empire paled at the mere mention of it. Ordinary medical officers were helpless against the plague, and even they themselves could not guarantee that they wouldn't be infected. The only effective way to get rid of the spores was the holy light healing of the paladins. However, a divine spell like Holy Light Healing could only be cast 5 times a day by a grade 1 Black Iron Knight with all their might. Apprentice knights, on the other hand, would use up all their holy power after a single cast. Faced with such a situation, the higher-ups of the city could only send out paladins to the villages where the plague was most intense to save the villagers with the most obvious symptoms. But how could a little water source save a prairie fire? In just one day, the number of people infected had increased from 1,000 to 10,000, and it showed signs of spreading to the entire city. The higher-ups of the city were thoroughly frightened by this. It must be noted that other than the deeply rooted and powerful Holy Knight group, there was also a large number of nobles who had real power and were deeply connected to each other. Although these nobles relied heavily on the power of the paladins to maintain their rule, they couldn't help but disagree with the paladins when they themselves were threatened by the plague. Many of the nobles living in the city requested to seal the city gates and prevent the infected from entering the city. On the other hand, the lower-ranked paladins hoped that the city would accept more refugees and protect them under the glory of the great holy light. For the first time, the nobles and the paladins, who usually worked together seamlessly, had a serious ideological conflict. There was even a small misunderstanding that broke out near the city gates. In an instant, the city was in chaos. Even the Holy Light Chapel was besieged by the lower-ranked nobles. After some behind-the-scenes negotiations, the nobles reluctantly agreed to open up the eastern part of the city to the refugees from all directions. The Church of Holy Light also sent a certain number of holy knights to the noble district to ensure that the plague would not spread to the area. As a result, Grimm was fortunate enough to become the personal bodyguard of some great nobles. In addition to these troubles, the Holy Light Chapel also seized the time to interrogate the captured witch. From her, the Church of Holy Light quickly obtained detailed information on the other 2 sorcerers and dispatched a large group of Black Iron Knights to search for and capture the remaining sorcerers in the nearby villages. Of course, due to the terrifying history of the Grade 3 Fire Shaman, the Holy Light Chapel had also sent 2 Grade 3 Gold Knights to lead a large number of Grade 2 Silver Knights to various places. That way, if they found traces of a wizard, they would be able to kill them nearby. In this way, the powerful strength gathered by the Holy Light Chapel was divided. However, Grimm's scheme was obviously like a fish in the moat caught in a fire at the city gate. He had managed to force out the other deception, which had been hiding very well. It was obvious that the Grade 3 deception witch, Ethereal, had already lurked in the outskirts of Hazeth City. She seemed to have the same intention as Grimm. Unfortunately, due to mutual distrust, she had no way of contacting Grimm in time. As a result, when Grimm launched his plague attack, a large number of Black Iron Knights, and the local village guards were unexpectedly able to find Eterial. Both sides had fought in a place called Redwood Village. Meanwhile, the Tier 3 Queen Eterial had displayed her might, slaughtering a paladin party and nearly 100 Redwood villagers in a frenzy. This was like poking a hornet's nest. The paladins who had been suppressing their anger began to gather near the Redwood Village. Even the 2 gold-tier paladins who were out guarding the village quickly rushed over. It had to be said that there were no weaklings among the Grade 3 witches. Moreover, Eterial was a famous tower master among the Deception witches. This time, Reyna had pulled her along to borrow her powerful martial strength. Unfortunately, they had been separated during the transmigration. Otherwise, with Eterial's protection, Rena would not have ended up in such a miserable state. How could such a powerful witch be forced to retreat by a group of natives? Thus, the Witch of Ethereal and the Holy Knights that swarmed towards Hezath City began to engage in guerrilla warfare. With the Deception Witch's extraordinary shape-shifting and lying ability, Ethereal was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing in a completely different form every time. She also deliberately avoided the 2 gold knights and targeted the silver and black iron knights. Thus, in the 3 days of cat and mouse, she single-handedly killed more than 10 holy knights of grade 1 and above. Due to the heavy pressure of reality, the Light Chapel in Hezath City had no choice but to send another gold knight to participate in the encirclement of the witch. With 3 against 1, the holy knights finally found a good opportunity to surround Eterial in a place called Haifeng Town. There were thousands of people there. Using the shape-shifting spell, Eterial hid in the town, making it even more difficult for the holy knights to encircle her. Grim, who had been hiding in Hezath City for 5 days, finally found the perfect opportunity to strike. There were only 2 gold knights guarding the Light Chapel, which Rena was imprisoned in a secret confessional in the chapel, guarded by a grade 3 gold knight called Kenneth. As for the materials for the witchcraft, according to Grimm's investigation and analysis, most of them were in the hands of a holy knight commander called Lambert. At the same time, he was also a grade 3 gold knight. 2 gold knights, one to guard the witch and the other to guard the materials. This was the best way to share the risk. Therefore, Grimm did not hesitate to start the ambush that he had been planning for a long time. Night, in Hezath City. In a luxurious room located in the western part of the city, Grimm pushed open the wooden window. The night sky was dark and the stars were dim. The moonlight that shone down had a hint of blood. Asterisk, knock, knock, knock. Asterisk, there was a light knock on the door. Lord Yedrick, it's time for dinner. A maid's voice came from outside the door. Tell your master that I'm going to pray for the holy light all night. I won't eat dinner, and no one is allowed to disturb me. Grimm replied sternly. Yes. After a series of light footsteps, silence returned to the room. Grimm raised his head and looked at the blood-red night sky. He stretched out a finger and slowly began to gather the fire elements in the air. Bright red fire elements were peeled off from the transparent air and gathered at the tip of Grimm's finger. The tip of the finger became hotter and brighter, as if it was about to burst into flames. At this moment, an invisible yet tangible force emerged from the void above Grimm's head and slowly extended towards him. Holy barrier! The fire elements on Grimm's fingertips had already gathered to the limit. Just a little more, and they would explode into a real elemental flame. When that happened, the holy barrier that enveloped the entire Hezath City would be triggered, attracting the attention of the holy knights from the Church of Holy Light. It had to be said that although the holy knights of the Envic Plane walked the path of faith, the magic power they mastered was only holy light. However, after thousands of years of continuous immersion, they had discovered some completely different ways of using the holy light. For example, the holy barrier that enveloped the entire Hezath City was one of them. Using the sensitivity and repulsion of the holy light, Hezath City had erected a huge holy barrier. Inside the barrier, any active or passive magic elements would trigger the barrier's counterattack. Fortunately, Grimm only gathered the fire elements on a small scale and did not turn it into a real fire spell. Otherwise, even if it was just some apprentice-level sorcery, it would trigger the Holy Barrier's counterattack. This Holy Barrier could not only monitor and sense the movement of magical energy, but it could also create a single elemental environment within it. This was actually a trap that the Holy Knights had left for the Magi. If any Magus were to rely on their strength and barge into Hezath City, the Holy Knights, in charge of the Holy Light spell formation, would be able to make the barrier visible. When that happened, all other magic elements apart from the Holy Light would be prohibited from entering Hezath City. To the Magi from another world who were surrounded, this was extremely frightening. Hence, besides gathering information, Grimm had been constantly probing the Holy Barrier's reaction and operating mechanism. Through the AI chip's detection of the energy undulations, he had basically confirmed the location of the Holy Barrier. If Grimm wanted to barge into the Church of Holy Light, he would have to first destroy the Holy Barrier. Otherwise, he would not do something as foolish as fighting against 2 grade 3 gold knights under the suppression of the Holy Barrier. Grimm cleared his thoughts under the blood-red moonlight and once again went through the entire battle plan in his mind. After confirming that there were no flaws, he gave the order to attack in the distance. Although the Holy Barrier was very sensitive to magic elements, it could not block the secret connection between souls. Chapter 972. Late at night, Hex's city was attacked. The attack came from outside the city. Hundreds and thousands of infected people who had been transformed into poison corpses swarmed in from all directions, charging at the city gates in a frenzy. For this moment, the plague spirit, Remy, had scattered the plague seeds all over the surrounding human villages. Thousands of people had been infected with the hidden plague. In order not to alert the enemy, he had planted these seeds in the bodies of the villagers and merchants, weakening their lethality. When Grimm gave the order, Remy immediately activated all the plague seeds. In the blink of an eye, thousands of people in a dozen villages fell to the ground, howling in pain as they began the terrifying transformation into poison corpses. Those with weaker physiques or who did not meet the basic requirements died miserably during the transformation. Only 700 to 800 people managed to endure the poison corpses transformation. But that was enough. Under Remy's command, all the people who had lost their minds and turned into poison corpses rushed into Hex's city, scaling the city walls with inhuman speed and agility, engaging the city guards who were rushing over in a melee. Rather than a melee, it was more like a massacre. These modified poison corpses did not know what death was and had lost all senses. They crawled on the ground, leaping as if they were flying, howling as they pounced at the heavily armed city guards. The city guards slashed at them with their swords, but it was as if they were slashing at a rhinoceros hide. Their wrists were numb from the impact, but they could not inflict enough damage. These poisonous corpses, which had no senses, were not afraid of sharp weapons, and possessed immense strength, leaped into the air one after another, pouncing on the warriors and pushing them to the ground. They lay on the bodies of the warriors and started to chew and tear at them crazily. Their claws and fangs were now as sharp as wild beasts, and they were now coated with terrifying poison. The moment they scratched a human warrior's skin, the poison would take effect within a dozen fingers, and they would die. As for these recently deceased warriors, when Remy floated over them, they began to twitch violently and howl again. Those who could become imperial warriors were obviously physically strong. Thus, most of them managed to survive the poison corpse's transformation and crawled up from the ground in a crooked manner. They had thrown away the swords in their hands and were still wearing the clothes they wore when they were alive. Their skin had turned a terrifying dark green color and was covered with dark purple spots. They let out strange cries and crawled on the ground like wild beasts. Soon, they merged with the previous poison corpses, jumped off the city wall, and pounced on the nearby residences. Although sporadic battles were still going on the city wall, there were just some black iron knights on duty who occupied a tower and were resisting stubbornly. When the impatient Remy personally stepped onto the battlefield, this tiny resistance immediately disappeared. Behind Remy were 3 servant corpses in standard paladin armor, howling like wild beasts. Although these poison corpses were easy to modify, they were still very useful against ordinary people. However, their individual strength was only comparable to a junior apprentice knight, and even apprentice knights could easily deal with a few of them. Therefore, Remy did not regard them as the main force of the battle. Instead, he ordered them to disperse and rush into the houses to infect as many humans as possible. Hundreds of poisoned corpses broke into Haz's city, turning it into a living hell in an instant. The helpless humans fled in all directions in a flurry. Screams, shouts, cries, and begging for mercy filled the air, waking up the city which had just quieted down from its dreams once again. When ordinary humans encountered poisoned corpses, they could only close their eyes and wait for their deaths. These poisoned corpses had no sense of pain, were fearless of death, and were covered in highly toxic toxins. They were also as agile as cheetahs. They could climb over walls as if they were walking on flat ground, and they could pass through houses and houses as if they were flying. The people were running helplessly, crying and screaming. Everywhere they looked, there were figures leaping from roof to roof and walls as if they were flying. From time to time, they would pounce out of the darkness and push humans to the ground. Then, they would gather in groups and fight with each other to enjoy the feast of flesh and blood. Some brave powerhouses stood out and chopped down the poison corpses one after another. However, these poison corpses did not seem to care about the huge wounds and bloody holes on their bodies. Even if their claws and heads were chopped off, they would still bite and claw at their opponents' bodies. Only when they were completely devoured would they die. Once they died, their entire bodies would emit a terrifying yellowish-green smoke. Any living thing that came into contact with the smoke would be infected by the terrifying plague seeds in the shortest time possible. Faced with these monsters that were so hard to kill, the people who had just mustered up some courage quickly collapsed. They threw away the wooden sticks and swords in their hands and hid, no longer willing to continue fighting these unkillable monsters. Just as the poisoned corpses were wreaking havoc in Haz's city, well-trained city guards in bright armor stepped out and formed a shield wall and spear formation at the intersection of streets. Then, under the command of the holy knights, they marched forward step by step in unison while shouting their slogans. A few poisoned corpses jumped down from the houses around them and pounced on the spear formation with their hands and feet. They leaped into the air and successfully pierced themselves on the 5-meter-long metal spears. Despite the terrifying penetrative damage, they did not seem to mind at all. Instead, they wriggled madly to let the spears pass through their bodies and slowly approach the shield wall. Their jet-black claws scratched against the metal shields, leaving horrifying scratches on them. A thick stench of poisonous smoke wafted out of their wounds and quickly wrapped around the front of the shield wall. The 3 shield bearers who were caught in the smoke coughed violently, and the entire shield wall immediately became distorted. Don't panic. Maintain the formation and continue to push forward. The holy knights who were acting as supervising officers with their long swords shouted loudly. As rays of milky white holy light shone on top of the warriors' heads, the plague virus that had just been infected on their bodies was instantly dispelled, and they quickly recovered to their normal state. As for the poisoned corpses hanging on the spears, the holy knights raised their swords and chopped them into a pile of scattered body parts. Then, they used torches to ignite the poisonous smoke. Ordinary poison corpses were obviously ineffective against the holy knights. Be it the poison in their bodies or their sharp claws and teeth, they were all restrained by the holy knights. From a certain point of view, the holy knights were the bane of all evil creatures. Many experts had gathered in Hezath City, so Remy the plague spirit chose to remain hidden behind the scenes and focus on modifying his poisoned corpses to attack the holy knights. Although the poisoned corpses would suffer great losses, it would still be able to firmly restrain the holy knights in the city. When the plague, poisonous corpses, and the paladins were fighting each other on the streets, Grimm had already put on his clothes and strode towards the sacred light chapel in the uniform of a black Iron Knight. Along the way, he could see holy knights and large groups of city guards hurriedly rushing over. The streets around the Holy Light Chapel had been cordoned off, and nobody was allowed to approach it. Only a few of the upper echelons of Hezath City could temporarily seek refuge in the Holy Light Chapel under the protection of the Holy Knights. As for the rest of the nobles, no matter how much they cried or cursed, they could not step into the Holy Light Chapel. However, they were still much stronger than ordinary people. After all, they were surrounded by a large group of city guards and holy knights who could provide them with some protection. At such a critical moment, the city was in a mess, and the command system of the holy knights and the city guards was in chaos. With the outfit of a black iron knight, Grim almost arrived at the gate of the Sacred Light Chapel without any obstacle. A tall fortress had been built here, and a large group of holy knights were personally stationed there. Seeing someone striding towards them, they could not help but hold their swords as their spirits rose. However, when they saw Grim's equipment, they let out a silent sigh of relief. A Grade 2 Silver Tier Knight came up to him and asked loudly, "What's your name? Why aren't you at your post? What are you doing here?" Grim's expression turned solemn. "Take me to the commander. I found traces of a wizard in the city." "What? A wizard? Where?" The Silver Tier Knight was startled and asked nervously, "This is urgent. Take me to the commander. A few days ago, I was sent to the noble district, and I accidentally found that there were people who had secretly colluded with wizards. They lured them into the city and secretly conducted some evil rituals." "What? These damn nobles." The Silver Tier Knight immediately clenched his teeth. "Good. This information is very good. I'll take you to the commander now. He was the only one who could give the order for something like this. Come with me." Having said that, the Silver Tier Knight turned around and gave some instructions to his subordinates. After that, he led Grim into the inner part of the chapel. As the two of them strode inside, Grim glanced at all the buildings in the building. "My lord, I've secretly observed. The evil ritual is most likely used to attack our holy circle. Is the security there safe enough?" "Don't worry." The Silver Tier Knight pointed at a brightly lit hall on the right side of the chapel and comforted him. "There are 3 Silver Tier Knights guarding there. If the enemy wants to destroy it, before he could finish, he suddenly felt a violent elemental fluctuation coming from behind him. Chapter 973. The Holy Barrier might be able to stop other magic elements besides holy light from condensing and shaping, but it obviously could not stop the semi-summoned metal puppets like the elemental magic machine. Therefore, after breaking the bones and tendons of the Grade 2 Silver Knight, the elemental magic machine roared and rushed towards the sacred hall with earth-shaking steps. The elemental magic machine ignored the black iron knights that it encountered along the way and just kept rushing in. Dozens of holy light bullets and holy light slashes that contained powerful holy light energy hit the surface of its metallic body. Apart from causing dazzling sparks and loud clanging sounds, the attacks could not harm its core at all. Regardless of whether it was the dazzling divine spells or the brave holy knights blocking its way, they were all smashed into pieces by its indestructible metal body. Not a single tile was left. When a Silver Knight heard the commotion outside, he rushed out of the hall with a long sword in his hand and shouted, "Who's messing around here?" Before he could finish a sentence, a steel fist the size of a wash basin smashed in front of him with a whistling sound. The Silver Knight barely managed to block the attack with his long sword in front of his body. Then, the long sword and his body were both bent at a shocking angle by the steel fist. After spitting out a mouthful of blood, the Silver Knight flew back to where he came from and returned to the sacred hall with a loud bang. The elemental magic machine also rushed into the sacred hall without any hesitation. This hall used to be an armory. Now, all the armory and wooden frames had been moved away, and a huge magical formation was carved on the floor of the hall. When the elemental magic machine and Grim entered the hall, the magical formation was still running. The sacred and massive holy light energy flowed and extended in the magic circle, faintly resonating with a nearby cathedral. The milky white holy energy formed a magical and mysterious huge formation in the air. Every time it rotated, it would release an indescribably powerful energy wave. The elemental magic machine was at the edge of the sacred formation, so it did not feel much. However, the moment Grimm stepped into the formation, he felt that the flame energy in his body suddenly became chaotic. It was no longer as free as before. The two Silver-Tier Knights who stayed behind helped their comrade, who was having trouble standing up. Their gazes first fell on the tall and mighty elemental magic machine. Then they looked at Grimm. "Who is it? Who are you?" A tall Silver-Tier Knight asked in a stern voice. He was obviously confused by Grimm's attire. "So much nonsense," Grimm sighed and snapped his fingers. "Smash it. Smash it hard." He could see very clearly that this sacred formation was almost completely powered by the crystal cores of high-level magical beasts. Of course, the Holy Light Chapel's accumulation of faith over the past few centuries was also a part of it. Compared to the Magus world, the spell formations here were too simple and crude. There wasn't even a basic defensive spell formation. Of course, it was also possible that these Holy Knights had too much faith in their own strength, thinking that 3 Silver-Tier Knights were enough to protect this place. Then, they would have to pay the price for their negligence and carelessness. The elemental magic equipment that weighed more than 10 tons didn't need to be deliberately destroyed. It just ran into the holy magic circle with heavy footsteps and twisted once. The green stone slabs that supported the magic circle shattered into pieces and couldn't be any more damaged. With the foundation of the formation damaged, the mysterious light floating in the air immediately disappeared. Grimm, who was very close to it, immediately felt that the flame energy in his body had returned to normal. "Ah, you villains! How dare you destroy the spell formation? Stay here." Seeing this, the 2 Silver-Tier Knights widened their eyes and pulled out their swords, ready to charge at Grimm. In front of them, Grimm, who was wearing a black Iron Knight's uniform, raised his head and sneered. The violent flame energy in his body once again burst out. Almost in the blink of an eye, Grimm expanded like a balloon into a terrifying 6-meter-tall fire giant that could support both heaven and earth. The armor and clothes on the surface of his body were instantly vaporized, and surging flames circled around his body. The top of the fire pillar crazily licked the roof of the hall and quickly burned a huge hole there. A majestic pressure burst out from the fire giant's body, making the 2 Silver-Tier Knights feel like they were walking against the wind. It was difficult for them to even take a step closer to Grimm. The extremely high temperature and terrifying flames quickly filled the entire hall. The 2 Silver-Tier Knights' clothes and hair were quickly burnt and vaporized. Even though they had gathered a thick layer of holy light to protect their bodies, they could still feel the stinging pain on their exposed skin, which was drying up and cracking. They wanted to open their mouths and shout, but what came out were streams of red flames. They wanted to charge forward, but they found that they could not move an inch. When they looked down, they saw that the soles of their silver boots had already melted and were stuck to the floor. Their exquisite armors and long swords in their hands had also turned into semi-liquid molten iron like red-hot wax, no longer able to see their original appearance. Just as the Silver-Tier Knights were screaming in fear, Grimm casually threw a violent fireball at them, instantly killing them. Tier 2. In Grimm's hands, these ordinary, unassuming Tier 2 monsters could be trampled on as he pleased. Furthermore, with Satan's Divine Ring, each of Grimm's attacks would have an additional 400 degrees of holy attack. How could a few Grade 2 Silver-Tier Knights withstand such a terrifying attack? As for whether holy attacks could hurt a Holy Knight, that was even more of a hypothetical question. Just like how Grimm was a fire wizard, could he be completely immune to fire damage? Could other wizards not hurt him with fire spells? That was an insult to elemental sorcery. As a fire wizard, Grimm only had a higher resistance to fire compared to ordinary wizards. If the fire damage from his opponent exceeded the limits of his resistance, he would also be hurt by the flames. Similarly, Holy Knights were only good at controlling the power of holy light. However, When faced with the holy light released by others, they would still have to bear the corresponding damage. The only difference was that the damage would be reduced to different degrees. However, with the power of Grimm's Grade 3 Berserk Fireball, coupled with the 400 degrees of holy attack, it was not something that these Silver Tier Knights could withstand. Therefore, after the fireball exploded, the violent shock wave swept across the entire hall like a raging wave. The 3 Silver Tier Knights were charred black by the waves of fire and burned into a pile of charcoal. Just then, a swift and violent bolt of white lightning flashed out, splitting a huge X-shaped hole in one of the walls of the hall. At the same time, a tall knight in full armor strode over, the narrow gap under the visor emitting violent anger. In his hand, the strange longsword was overflowing with a layer of pure and milky holy light. Grimm! It was obvious that the Holy Knight Commander had already learned the name of the fire wizard from Rena. Lambert, sorry to keep you waiting. Grimm stood tall, using his huge body to knock down the crumbling wall, and appeared in front of the Holy Knight. Ever since the witch was transported to Hezath City, Commander Lambert had already foreseen this scene. However, the fire wizard's ruthlessness and unscrupulousness still exceeded his expectations. He could not understand why a Tier 3 wizard would have the confidence to barge into the Holy Knight's camp and start massacre. Could it be that these Tier 3 wizards from another world were so much stronger than Tier 3 Golden Knights? However, the Holy Light could never give him a reasonable explanation. Just as Lambert was about to brandish his blinding sword to deal with the reckless fire wizard, the elemental machine that stood beside Grimm like a loyal follower let out a roar and charged towards the Holy Knight Commander. Grimm, on the other hand, took the opportunity to quickly draw fire runes in the air and chanted a deafening incantation. As he rapidly cast the spell, circles of spatial ripples quickly gathered above his head and then condensed into a temporary wormhole. While Grimm was casting spells, a dozen fully armored Silver Tier Knights had gathered around him. They did not care about the scorching heat of the field of flames as they rushed to Grimm's side. They were frantically trying to break down the layers of flame shields and the 2 swirling lava shields around Grimm's body. Unfortunately, they were not fast enough. As the last syllable of the incantation was completed, the wormhole quickly formed, and a ferocious and terrifying dragon appeared in front of everyone. Why did you summon me again so soon? Grimm, I haven't recovered from my previous injuries. As soon as the 30-meter-long dragon emerged from the wormhole, it raised its neck and let out a deafening roar. A powerful draconic aura quickly engulfed the entire Holy Light Chapel. It was obvious that the natives of Invik Realm had never seen a living dragon before, so they could not understand the obscure draconic language. Why don't I see you complaining when I'm giving you benefits? You're just making excuses when I ask you to do some work. See for yourself. This is a new city. The earlier we finish it, the more time you have to collect your wealth. Grimm, who had transformed into a fire giant, roared. A new city. It's a new city, but it's not as big as the previous one. With the powerful spiritual force of the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon, Arms, he only needed to use his senses to sense the density of life within a few miles. When he thought back to the last time he raided a huge city, he was forced to return to his original realm after robbing the Lord's mansion and a few other mansions. His heart was bleeding. Therefore, when it suddenly discovered that a new treasure trove had appeared in front of it today, its heart was filled with excitement and torment. It was simply indescribable. With a loud roar, Arms opened his mouth, and a terrifying lightning net enveloped the battlefield. He then retracted his wings and charged towards the Paladin Commander like a brave knight. Chapter 974. In the 1,000 planes of existence, one's rank did not represent everything. Rank was only used to differentiate the strength of the same species at different stages. However, once the species was different, the difference in strength would not be as obvious. Take the few people in the arena, for example. They were all rank 3 on the surface, but if they really went all out, the outcome would be completely unexpected. To put it simply, the rank 3 Thunder Dragon, Arms, could easily defeat the Gold Tier Knight, Lambert. Both of them focused on strength and physique, with spirit as support. They had both physical strength and magical power. However, Arms relied on his powerful dragon physique to suppress Lambert, who was also a warrior of both magic and martial arts. Hence, even though both of them were at Tier 3, the Thunder Dragon Arms only had to pay a small price to kill Lambert. On the other hand, the rank 3 Thunder Dragon was no match for Grimm, who had the Blazing Monarch set and Sodden's Divine Ring. If he also had the elemental equipment, Grimm might even have a chance to kill the rebellious rank 3 Thunder Dragon. The only reason why Arms was so obedient during this period of time was probably because of Grimm's rapid growth and strength. Now, the rank 3 Thunder Dragon and the rank 3 elemental equipment were working together to attack the Holy Knight commander, Lambert. He could only roar in anger, but did not change the fact that he was being beaten up by the two of them. If it were not for the large number of rank 2 Silver Tier Knights rushing into the fray, using their bodies as shields and holy light as weapons, Lambert would have died on the battlefield. Grimm did not participate in the siege. Instead, he stood quietly by the side of the arena. His burning eyes slowly scanned the buildings around him, his eyes showing a hint of disdain. There were 2 rank 3 knights guarding the Holy Light Chapel, but only one of them came out. It was obvious that the other one was hiding in the dark, waiting for a chance to launch a sneak attack, and his target was most likely himself. If you don't come out, I'll force you out." Grimm sneered in his heart and immediately started chanting the spell Flaming Gate Summon. In the Chapel of Holy Light, there were fire giants, elemental magic machines, and giant dragons fighting to the death inside. It was a complete mess, and the Holy Knights were utterly defeated. If another group of abominable flaming creatures appeared, it would be even more impossible for them to continue fighting. However, when Grimm was halfway through his incantation, the sacred hall behind him suddenly flashed with a white light. A snow-white sword ray instantly appeared behind him. There was a series of crackling sounds. The flame shield and lava shield around Grimm, who had transformed into a fire giant, exploded. They were completely destroyed by the sword that was imbued with powerful holy energy. The long sword swiftly slashed across the fire giant's waist, leaving a 1-meter-long and half-meter-deep gash on the lava armor. A stream of scarlet flames wrapped around the boiling magma and splashed out. The swift figure dodged Grimm's flame giant hand, and with a backhand slash, he chopped off another 2 of the flame giant's fingers. The consecutive injuries made Grimm furious. After transforming into a fire giant, his strength and vitality had indeed increased, but his agility had also been suppressed to an unbearable level. Grimm did not want to play any more cat and mouse games with his opponent. He lifted his thick flame giant leg and stomped heavily on the ground. In the next second, a ring of flame suddenly burst out from his body, spreading in all directions in a ring-shaped manner. Any creature within the range of the ring of flames would receive 220 degrees of fire damage and would be pushed 50 meters away by the shockwave of the flames. Resistance Ring of Fire. This was a grade 3 fire spell that Grimm had carefully selected. It was optimized by the AI chip, and it had both the effects of fire damage and the ability to repel enemies. The Golden Knight who ambushed Grimm was obviously an agile swordsman. When he saw the ring of fire approaching him, he immediately dodged and retreated without hesitation. The shockwave of the flames was less than half a meter away from his feet, but it could not catch up to his opponent. After dodging 50 meters away, the Golden Knight waited for the power of the flames to dissipate and turn into flaming fragments that scorched his skin. He then stopped and charged at Grimm like a bolt of lightning. Although he would still be burned by the sea of flames, with the resistance of a grade 3 Golden Knight, he could still create a few more holes on Grimm's body before the holy light barrier was corroded. At their level, it was extremely difficult to rely on battle techniques and killing methods to kill an enemy without suffering any damage. Most of the time, they were fighting with one word: ruthlessness. As long as you are more injured than me, as long as I can recover faster than you, that's enough. However, what Kenny did not expect was that the fire magus he was facing was not an ordinary magus, but a close-range magus who also had powerful close combat abilities. With the elemental shaping ability of the flame emblem, Grimm's fire giant began to slowly shrink and condense. In the end, he turned into a terrifying figure that was 3 meters tall and covered in bright yellow flames. He condensed a flame shield in his left hand and a flame javelin in his right. He didn't give Kenneth a chance to get close to him as he hurled the flame javelin at him. In the field of vision of Grimm's burning eye, all the physical boundaries disappeared. The entire field of vision was filled with mottled colors of different sizes and shapes. With his elemental sight, Grimm could directly see the flow of magical elements in his field of vision. With his remote sensing, Grimm could roughly see the distribution of power in his opponent's body. Red halos of different sizes and shades were distributed all over Knight Kenneth's body, especially his legs, chest, and right wrist. They were not fixed, but slightly changed according to the Golden Knight's every movement. Every time Kent's feet touched the ground and changed directions in a strange manner, the red glow around his legs and feet was simply dazzling and dazzling to the eyes. Every time Kenneth rushed to Grimm's side and attacked, the right wrist that held the sword would burst forth with power. However, what caught Grimm's attention the most was the large milky white halo on Kenneth's chest. Countless white threads extended from it, connecting to most of his limbs and organs. It was with the support of the white light that Kenneth was able to maintain his ghost-like movements. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm was able to successfully defend against the Agility Knight's sneak attacks. Kenneth's sneak attacks were detected by Grimm in advance. If not for Kenneth's agility being much higher than Grimm's, he would have been injured by the flame spears. This was the multi-purpose battle support system that Grimm and the AI chip had spent a long time to come up with. According to Grimm's initial plan, this system should at least allow him to completely control the battlefield. No matter how many enemies there were, no matter how strong they were, his power could not be everywhere and at all times. Hence, Grimm, who could see through the situation and predict the future, could roam the battlefield as he pleased. He would roam the weakest spot of the enemy, roam the place where the enemy could not exert their full strength, and then find an opening to attack, using the least amount of energy and the lowest risk to kill the enemy on the spot. However, the idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. To control the battlefield, he needed to see through the enemy's movements. The AI chip's current abilities were enough to deal with normal people. However, to deal with opponents of the same rank or higher, he needed to see through energy, elemental vision, long-range sensing, motion capture, and other abilities, as well as massive amounts of data. Using all these abilities required Grimm to expend a great deal of his mental strength. With his current spiritual force, he could not use it for a long period of time. At the very least, he could not do it on the battlefield of life and death. No, it should be said that the AI chip could not do it. Right now, the AI chip could only provide simple elemental vision and energy vision, but could not completely grasp the opponent's movements. After all, the higher the rank of the enemy, the sharper their reactions would be. When they sensed the changes in Grimm's battle stance and attack methods, they would immediately adjust their battle strategy. Hence, when the AI chip calculated the enemy's next move and attack stance, not only did it have to take into account strength, vitality, agility, spirit, battlefield environment, and other factors, it also had to calculate the enemy's possible reaction after his attack stance changed. All of this required an extremely powerful data processing ability. The current AI chip obviously cannot do it. However, even if it only provided the simplest support, it was still a great help to Grimm's battle. At least, in the eyes of Knight Kenneth, the fellow he was fighting was simply a demon that could read minds. No matter what tricks he used, no matter how he tried to confuse his opponent, he would be able to throw the flaming javelins at the places that made him uncomfortable. Many of the flaming javelins that he thought were thrown wrongly were proven to be terrifying after a few flicks of his fingers. This was because Kenneth had actually been forced to send himself to the place where the flaming javelins had exploded. Although most of the flames were blocked by the holy light, the power of the holy light condensed in Kenneth's body was rapidly being consumed. Once the power of the holy light disappeared, Kenneth would not be as unharmed as he was now in that terrifying burning domain. Chapter 975. Although the battle was short, it was extremely fierce. The outcome of the battle had already been decided from the moment the battle began. The first to fall was, of course, the paladin commander. No matter how skilled he was in combat and how pure his holy light was, Lambert was undeniably defeated under the pincer attack of two powerful opponents. His long sword was broken by the elemental equipment, and his body was charred black by the raging waves of lightning. After winning the battle, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon soared into the sky and rushed towards the most prosperous and luxurious area in the city. Of course, before it left, it did not forget to give the Agility Paladin another round of Dragon Breath. Kenneth, who had been able to put up a fight against Grimm, was now in a tragic situation. First, he was hit by the Dragon Breath, and the holy light on his body began to flicker. Next, Grimm's chain of violent fireballs engulfed the area around him. By the time he rushed out of the fireball, his clothes had already been set ablaze. Even his thick holy armor had been blasted into pieces, turning into broken metal pieces that barely hung on his body. The skin under the armor was filled with crisscrossing scratches. There was a terrifying wound on his right rib that was tens of centimeters long and a few centimeters wide. The flesh on the surface of the wound had been charred black. Grade 3. This was the Grade 3 of Invicta Plane. An almost imperceptible sneer appeared on Grimm's flaming face. In Invicta Plane, Grade 3 Gold Knights like them could be considered the peak of combat power. However, in the eyes of the powerful wizards who had come from other planes, they were nothing more than prey. With Grimm's current strength, a Gold Knight was nothing in his eyes. If the two Gold Knights worked together, Grimm and his elemental equipment would still have a high chance of winning. If the 5 Gold Knights from Hezath City were here, Grimm could use his elemental equipment, Arms the Thunder Dragon, and Remy the Plague Spirit. He would not lose to them at all. If Grimm was ruthless and used up one of his trump cards, pulling Flame Tiger Sindar from the Fire Elemental Plane over to be his fighter, they might even have a 60 to 70% chance of winning. However, Sindar was not Grimm's subordinate. It only promised to attack 3 times, so unless it was absolutely necessary, Grimm was not willing to waste the promise of a Grade 3 Flame Tiger on a place like this. Now that the 2 Gold Knights had fallen, the rest of the Knights were low-level Silver Knights and Black Iron Knights. As for those Apprentice Knights, they didn't even have the ability to step onto the battlefield. Setting everything else aside, just Grimm's burning domain and the Thunder Dragon's dragons might weren't something they could resist with their weak strength. When the difference in strength was too great, they didn't even have the chance to fight to the death, let alone gather together to besiege the enemy. The battle was over. Grimm chuckled as he stooped down, ready to capture the 2 defeated Golden Knights in one fell swoop, and then search for the materials for the Magus formation. But just as he bent down, the wind whistled in the air. Grimm tilted his head slightly, and from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a magnificent, crescent moon-shaped sword light. Holy Light Slash. It was the Holy Light Slash. Beep, beep, beep. Warning, warning. Extremely powerful energy has been detected. Preliminary judgment. Grade 4. A sharp, ear-piercing alarm sounded in Grimm's mind. His clumsy body obviously could not dodge the sudden attack in time. Fortunately, the elemental equipment was standing right beside him. He opened his hand and moved his body forward, blocking the sword flash in time. The violent Holy Light Slash collided with the elemental magic equipment's defensive force field, and like a red-hot table knife cutting through butter, it silently cut through the defensive force field. The crescent-shaped Holy Light Slash that was more than a meter long directly cut through the indestructible metal body of the elemental equipment, leaving a horrifying wound on it. If it was only 5 centimeters away, the holy light slash would have cut through the 30 centimeters thick metal body of the elemental equipment and killed it in one hit. Even after blocking such a terrifying attack, the elemental equipment still felt like it was hit by a ferocious elephant. Its entire body was sent flying into the air, smashing through the wall behind it, and falling into the ruins of a large building. If the elemental equipment's defense was like this, if that holy light slash had hit him, Grimm swallowed hard, and for the first time, a trace of fear rose from the bottom of his heart. Grimm straightened his body, quickly replenishing his external defenses while observing the tall, majestic figure that strode in from the entrance of the Holy Light Chapel. Short and straight white hair, a simple and unsophisticated face, as well as that majestic and mighty expression of rage. Grimm's heart grew heavier and heavier. Grade 4. This was a genuine grade 4 Holy Paladin. The energy radiating from his body was like a blazing sun rising in the night sky. Grimm had no choice but to order the AI chip to lower the intensity of his elemental vision. How? How is this possible? You should have arrived here in 3 days. Even with Grimm's calm demeanor, he could not help but feel flustered at this moment. Before making his move, Grimm had carefully investigated the whereabouts of this grade 4 Holy Paladin. He had left the Imperial capital on the 12th of June, bringing a group of people to the north and heading straight for Harkon City. By the time Grimm slaughtered Harkon City on the 17th of June, this Holy Paladin was only halfway there. By the time Grimm arrived at Zora City, the Holy Paladin should have just arrived in the vicinity of Harkon City. This way, Grimm and the Holy Paladin had perfectly avoided each other. Even if the Holy Paladin had received the news from Harkon City and arrived here in time, he should not have arrived so quickly. Could it be that something went wrong? Just as Grimm's eyes flickered with suspicion, he saw 3 strange figures behind the grade 4 Holy Paladin. Although they were all wrapped in thick black cloaks and their faces were covered by low hoods, Grimm could still recognize them based on the familiar energy aura and strange elemental undulations. It's them, the 3 strange magi who had crossed worlds to kill him. Could it be that these bastards had chosen to work together with the Holy Paladins? Grimm felt the world spin around him, frightened by the terrifying reality in front of him. However, the doubts he had were easily resolved. The Holy Paladins might be good at defense, but they were slow at movement. However, with the help of these 3 magi who had crossed worlds, crossing thousands of miles in just 4 days was not that difficult to accept. However, this also meant that the 2 groups of enemies that had been chasing him had now completely merged. In his situation, seeing the approaching tier 4 Divine Knight, Grimm did not dare hesitate. Immediately, he raised his hands and summoned a rain of fire at the approaching Divine Knight. His choice was also very sinister. This rain of fire had obviously engulfed the 2 Golden Knights who had fallen to the ground and could not get up. How dare you! The grade 4 Holy Paladin roared and quickly shot 2 grenades of holy light into the bodies of the 2 Golden Knights before the rain of fire could reach them. The 2 Golden Knights, who had already turned into charred human forms, trembled and spat out a thin stream of magical flames towards the sky. They opened their eyes abruptly. Although their injuries were still severe, the holy light in their bodies had been triggered by the grenades of holy light and began to emit a layer of sacred milky white light, quickly healing their injuries. As for the rain of fire, it was turned into scattered heat waves and chaotic flames by a strange force when it was 3 meters away from them. It could not hurt them at all. With the grade 4 Holy Paladin present, Grimm did not have the heart to continue fighting. This time, he summoned a rain of fire to stop them from advancing, and also to restrict the Holy Paladin's attacks, so that he could focus his attention on protecting the 2 Golden Knights. Grimm took this opportunity to rush into the ruins, retrieve his elemental equipment, and escape towards the west of the city without looking back. The 3 wizards behind the Holy Paladin sneered and planned to stop Grimm. However, a gust of wind blew above their heads, and a powerful lightning net wrapped around them. Damn, Grim. I knew you wouldn't give me a good introduction. Damn. This is a grade 4 big guy. The grade 3 thunder dragon glided across the sky above the Holy Light Chapel. It lowered its head and spat out a lightning dragon breath, then ran away as fast as it could. The 3 wizards and the Holy Paladin looked up at the same time. They could not help but feel a chill in their hearts when they saw the powerful body of the thunder dragon. That legendary fire wizard could summon a dragon? It seemed like they could not let this guy grow any further. Holy Paladin Ada? Carly let loose an enraged snort as he raised his long sword and pointed it at the giant dragon in the sky. A pillar of milky white holy light instantly descended upon Arms. Arms struggled with all his might for a moment, but he couldn't withstand the holy power that had suddenly engulfed his entire body. He was banished back to Lance Plain by the power of the Prayer of Justice. By this time, Grim had already run more than a kilometer away, madly escaping towards the west of the city. According to the agreement, this guy is ours. Do you have any objections to that? The sorcerer in the lead asked coldly. His cold words were mixed with a strange hissing sound. Get out of here, you evil wizards. Remember, if you hurt the citizens of the Zambi's empire, our agreement will be nullified. I will capture you one by one and purify you with the holy light. The grade 4 Holy Paladin warned in a stern voice. Chapter 976. As soon as she stepped out of the Chapel of Light, the old witch Gwen Neville stopped in her tracks and turned her head to look at a certain spot in the city. Old fellow, what are you waiting for? If you wait any longer, that fire wizard will be far away. The giant snake wizard Natagu said coldly. You guys go first. I want to take a look over there. The old witch laughed strangely. I can feel a sweet plague aura spreading. The fire wizard's plague familiar is in that direction. The giant snake wizard hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. It's good to split up. You go after the plague poison spirit, and the 2 of us go after the fire wizard. They'll have to meet up eventually, so it's safer this way. All right, let's go. After saying that, she did not say anything else, and summoned a huge black mamba python that was more than 20 meters long. It carried her and the psionic warlock Benika on its back, and quickly chased after the strong flame aura in the air. The old witch laughed sinisterly, and leaned on her pitch-black wooden staff that was even taller than her head as she turned into the darkness of the street. The poisoned corpses in the north of the city were retreating. After receiving Grim's message, the plague poison spirit Remy did not hesitate to instruct the poisoned corpses to move out of the city. The poisoned corpses with lower levels and aptitudes were abandoned, and they were allowed to run amok in the city, giving the holy knights something to do. Most of the poisoned corpses with the strength of an apprentice swarmed out of the city walls, moving towards the wasteland in the distance. Among them, there were more than a dozen servant corpses that had advanced to grade 1. Compared to the poisoned corpses, the servant corpses were more shriveled and skinny, but their skeletons were larger, and their strength, vitality, and agility had been greatly improved. Their muscles were more solid and dense, and even without any armor, their body's defense was not weaker than ordinary enchanted leather armor. Their movements were also more agile, and their hands and feet had evolved into sharp claws, allowing them to easily climb up walls and ceilings. Their strange flexibility allowed them to perform all kinds of strange actions that humans could not imitate. Therefore, their killing methods were much more terrifying than the poisoned corpses. Remy, the plague poison spirit, who was only a meter tall and had the appearance of a 4 or a 5-year-old boy, was sitting on the back of the most powerful servant corpse, leading a group of lively little fellows behind him. Like a torrent, they crossed the city wall, crossed the moat, and surged into the wilderness. While galloping forward on the servant corpse, Remy glanced around in the darkness in confusion. He always felt that a pair of gloomy eyes were secretly watching him. After all, it was a unique creature that evolved from a contract spirit. It could not learn knowledge systematically like wizards and master witchcraft. Almost all of the abilities it possessed were formed spontaneously. Every time its strength grew to a certain stage, it would be like unlocking a certain innate potential. Some strange abilities would surge into its brain and be deeply etched into its soul. In this way, even if it didn't need to learn or practice, these abilities would automatically become its innate abilities, just like breathing and sleeping. After reaching grade 1, Remy obtained the innate ability Plague Spores. After reaching grade 2, Remy obtained the innate ability Plague Aura. After reaching grade 3, Remy obtained the innate ability Plague Transformation. Plague Spores allowed Remy to transform himself into an incubator, using his Plague innate ability to continuously release terrible Plague Spores. Moreover, Remy could also control the Plague Spores, which were highly lethal, highly contagious, and highly harmful. Plague Aura could completely turn Remy into a poison spirit. Not only could he quickly spread Plague Spores, but even the sharp teeth and claws of the plague creatures fighting around him could be infused with plague bacteria. Seriously speaking, after reaching grade 3, with the Plague Transformation ability, Remy's strength could be considered to have taken shape. The creatures killed by the plague before were dead, and apart from bringing some life energy to Remy, there was no other benefit. But now, with the Plague Transformation ability, the creatures that died to the plague had a certain chance of standing up again under the control of the spore bacteria, becoming plague creatures under Remy's control. Moreover, these plague creatures could also evolve through bloody and cruel slaughter. However, their evolutionary route was obviously different from the secular way of increasing their rank. What they followed was a killing evolution system. It was wishful thinking for ordinary creatures to evolve to grade 1 in a single night. However, Remy's plague creatures, poison corpses, had only gone on a killing spree in Hazeth City, and 17 grade 1 servant corpses had already appeared. Of course, a large part of the reason for this was that these servant corpses were apprentice knights or black iron knights before they died. They were born with a good foundation, and with the high-quality flesh and blood in Hazeth City, they had a much higher chance of advancing quickly after being transformed into plague creatures. However, no matter how much these plague creatures advanced, they would never be able to break free from Remy's soul shackles. They were dead creatures to begin with, and it was Remy's strange ability that allowed them to come back to life. Therefore, in front of these 600 to 700 plague creatures, Remy was the undisputed king, the ruler they were willing to protect with their lives. From a certain point of view, plague creatures and undead creatures were almost the same. The difference was that the former relied on plague spores to revive, while the latter relied on negative energy to support their soul core. As Remy commanded the poison corpses and servant corpses to run wildly in the dark wilderness, the alarm in his mind grew stronger. He suddenly turned around, his green pupils immediately catching sight of a strange figure in the blood-red sky. It was a strange old witch riding a flying broom. She wore a tall pointed hat, had a head full of white hair, and sunken cheeks. Her face was covered in layers of wrinkles and black age spots, and her hunched waist was almost bent at a 90-degree angle. The old witch was currently flying in the sky, a huge blood-red moon hanging behind her, making her look even more sinister and terrifying. A grade 3 witch, and a highly toxic one. It didn't take long for Remy to identify the other party. It couldn't be helped. Both of them were poison users, and the poison on their bodies could be clearly smelled from 100 meters away. Kakik, I didn't expect you to be a grade 3 contract spirit. This old woman is in luck. TSK, TSK, TSK. You even have your own intelligence. Looks like that kid has invested a lot of resources in you. The old witch sneered coldly and muttered to herself. She didn't take Remy seriously at all. Although she was alone, and the other party was leading a small army, she still looked confident that she could defeat the other party. There was no other reason than that the Poison Corpse army hadn't been formed yet. A group of apprentice-level poison corpses and a dozen grade 1 servant corpses posed no threat to the grade 3 poison woman. even if their numbers were increased by 10 times. At the level of Tier 3, it was no longer possible to simply rely on numbers to grind them down. To kill any Grade 3 creature, one needed the right time, the right place, and a large enough cannon fodder army. All three were indispensable. In the eyes of this Grade 3 poison woman, the poison spirit was still very weak, and the wizard beast army it had gathered was even more vulnerable. If it wasn't for her evil hobby of torturing and killing her opponents, Guinevere would have attacked long ago. Damn it, it's a poison woman. Hello. May I know why you're looking for me? A sweet and warm smile appeared on the plague-poisoned spirit Remy's dark green face. She blinked her strange green eyes and looked curiously at the old witch. As she spoke, a cluster of horrifying plague spores, so tiny that they were hard to see with the naked eye, slowly dispersed into the air and invaded the other party's body like invisible ink. A distance of 200 meters was nothing to these strange plague spores. Hee, kid, trying to act cute in front of this old woman? Then let me show you the power of this old woman's poison. The old witch laughed coldly. Remy's green eyes could clearly see that a similarly invisible poisonous fog was dispersing from the other party's body, quickly overlapping with the plague spores she had spread. The two poisonous mists that were still dispersing a moment ago immediately appeared in the void, tumbling and vibrating in the next moment. Like two groups of ferocious beasts, they entangled and devoured each other, trying their best to infect each other into their own kind. The two poisonous fog had originally been fighting only between Remy and the poison woman, but as time passed and the night wind blew, the area they covered became larger and larger, and the battlefield spread to the entire wilderness. They boiled, shook, infected, and devoured each other. The poisoned corpses and the servant corpses in the poisonous fog immediately became the main battlefield of the two poisonous fungi. Any poisoned corpse that was drawn into the poisonous fog would have its tough skin, which was originally invulnerable to blades and swords, fester on a large area, as if it had been corroded by a strong acid, revealing the bright red flesh underneath that had not yet completely rotted. Sensing the presence of flesh and blood, the two streams of poisonous fog were like hungry wolves that had smelled fresh blood. They rushed into the bodies of the poisoned corpses and fought for control of their lives in every muscle, every bit of flesh, and every organ of their bodies. No matter which side gained the upper hand, they would quickly infect every bit of flesh and bone into their own kind. As black smoke escaped from the eyes, ears, mouth, and nose of the poisoned corpses, their bodies quickly decayed and collapsed. In the blink of an eye, a poisoned corpse with the power of an apprentice was reduced to a pile of corroded bones full of holes. The newly dispersed poisonous fog merged with the other side's troops, imperceptibly strengthening their strength. Chapter 977. Kakik. Little fellow, you found the right person to compete with this old hag in poison spells. Let's see who's more poisonous. With a sneer, poison centipede Guinevere, who was high in the sky, emitted a thicker and more formless poisonous miasma, wrapping around Remy from all angles. They were obviously tiny, formless poisonous fungi, but they were controlled by this poisonous woman like she was her own arm. She was even more obedient than an army that had been trained 1,000 times. The inexperienced Remy's expression instantly turned ugly. He gently patted the servant corpse beneath him, and it immediately turned around and rushed into the distance. All the low-level poisoned corpses stayed where they were, and some even rushed into the poisonous mist, voluntarily becoming hosts for the plague spores to reproduce. For a moment, the field was shrouded in black mist, and the whole world seemed to be shrouded in a hazy illusion. Taking advantage of the enemy's obscured vision, the remaining dozen or so servant corpses also fled in all directions, fleeing to different areas. Trying to escape? He. Little guy, it's better if you stay here. The old witch had already locked onto Remy, so how could she not notice his movements? With a sinister smile, the old witch gathered a thick layer of poisonous miasma to protect her body and rushed into the poisonous mist, intending to continue chasing the escaping poison spirit. But what she didn't expect was that as soon as she rushed into the poisonous mist, before she could even pass through it, the surrounding miasma that was as dense as a cloud quickly boiled and exploded. Exploded? This was a special ability that the old witch didn't expect. The poisonous fungi she controlled had various abilities, such as infection, corrosion, assimilation, transformation, lurking, eruption, but none of them had the ability to explode. This seemed to belong to the category of elemental sorcery, but no matter how surprised and horrified she was, the huge poisonous mist still exploded with her as the center. Just like elemental sorcery, the plague spores, large and small, and the poisonous fungi that were hard to see with the naked eye, self-destructed in an extremely tragic way. And she, Gwen Neville, the self-proclaimed powerful poisonous woman, was in the center of the explosion when the poisonous mist exploded. A moment of carelessness and arrogance immediately made the poisonous woman pay a heavy price. Cough, cough, cough. Amidst a series of violent coughs and gasps, the black-faced Guinevere staggered out of the self-destruct circle, then screamed like a bird with broken wings and fell from the sky. After a full 2 minutes, Guinevere finally dispelled the poisonous cloud that shrouded her body. She then took out a bright-colored grass cake from her earthen jar, broke it into pieces, and chewed hard. Then, she coughed violently again. This time, she vomited out some purplish-black blood, and there were some pieces of internal organs and flesh mixed in it. Using this self-mutilating method to clear the plague spores in her body, Guinevere was completely relieved. However, as a result, her already weak physique was reduced by another 2 or 3 points. It would be very difficult to raise it in a short period of time. The old witch's triangular eyes widened as she gritted her teeth and cursed the poison spirit for his evil deeds. However, what surprised her even more was that the way the other party controlled the toadstool was so strange that he could actually make the toadstool self-destruct. Was it a poison technique or an innate ability? This was obviously unknown. If she really wanted to know, she would probably have to capture the poison spirit and dissect him completely. In the previous round, the old witch was not really defeated. She was just careless for a moment and fell into the little guy's trap. The poison and latent spores in her body were almost instantly dispelled. Although the process of dispelling the poison and the internal organs and physique were a little affected, the old witch was still a level 3 poison woman. However, to a tier 3 poison woman, this little bit of damage was nothing more than a minor injury. What she hated the most was the damage to her reputation. The old witch angrily crawled up from the muddy ground and patted off the filth on her black robe while loudly cursing the clever brat. Under her angry gaze, the magic broom that was used as a flying device was scattered by the self-destruct just now and could no longer fly. The old witch's specialty was poison, not flying. So in order to improve her mobility, she bought the magic broom that was the latest model in the Northern Witches Nimbus series. It was also the fastest Nimbus 2000. Who knew that because of a moment of carelessness, it would be destroyed in the hands of a fledgling? Trembling with anger, the old witch could only take out another flying broom and ride it with difficulty. With a whoosh, she flew into the sky and chased after the other party. The self-destruction just now had also caused the old witch to lose her mental lock on the poison spirit. Whether she could catch up to the other party now, she could only rely on luck and her half-baked tracking technique. As the poison spirit and the old witch left one after the other, the wilderness once again returned to peace. However, the remaining poisonous fog slowly seeped into the surrounding soil and vegetation, causing them to rapidly wither and wither. It was as if all life had been extinguished. If not for the holy knights casting a large-scale purification spell, the area within a radius of a few dozen miles would have become a terrifying land of death. No living creature or plant would be able to survive here, and if one were to get too close, there would be a huge risk of being infected by the plague. The short battle between two Grade 3 poison spellcasters had actually created a plague zone with a radius of a few dozen miles in the Invicta Plain. This fully revealed the terror and power of a Grade 3 creature. If a high-ranked spellcaster abused their abilities without restraint, the damage caused to the plane would be extremely difficult to repair. If Grade 3 was already like this, what about Grade 4? Most of the time, the upper limit of the power of the Great Thousand Planes was at Grade 4. It could not be denied that it was inevitable. Grim was flying at high speed. At this moment, he had already transformed into a huge, shapeless ball of fire, leaving a clear trail of fire in the sky as he flew forward quickly. Every 5 seconds, the ball of fire would cast flame leap, instantly changing its direction and shooting off in another direction. The power of fire spells was great, but it could easily leave a clear trail when escaping. This was something that could not be helped. Though the two magi behind him had already disappeared without a trace, Grim did not dare to slack off and continued to flee with all his might. He could clearly sense a sinister aura that was like the tongue of a venomous snake coiling around his body, closely following his every move. It was that giant serpent Magus. Grim dared to say that the other party definitely had some sort of strange tracking ability that allowed it to chase after him without the slightest mistake, closing the distance between them bit by bit. Was it a spell or an innate ability? Without any concrete information, even AI Chip could not answer this question and could only remain suspicious. After running for half a day, Grim still couldn't get rid of this strange feeling. He decided to stop running aimlessly. Instead, he changed his direction and headed for the nearest active volcano. Since he could not escape, he would fight. As the one fleeing, Grim naturally had the opportunity to choose the most suitable place to fight. Mount Gansus was the most famous active volcano in the Zambez Empire, and it was also the most active one. From a bird's-eye view, Mount Gansus looked like a beautiful circular crater. It was not very tall, and as one walked on the slopes filled with volcanic debris, a strange rustling sound could be heard. Due to the continuous eruptions all year round, it was hard to see any vegetation in the vicinity of the volcano. Only at a distance of 5 kilometers could some sparse trees be seen. Just as Grim flew near Mount Gansus, he saw the thick column of gray smoke rising straight into the sky, as well as the continuous rumbling of the volcano. Sensing the dense fire elemental aura here, the fire energy in Grim's body became even more active. He paused for a moment in the air and scanned his surroundings. Then, he turned into a ball of flames and dove into the slowly flowing lava in the volcano's crater. Grim, who had turned into a humanoid flame, quickly traversed through the lava. It was as if he had returned to his own home. Not only were the lava as hot as 2,000 to 3,000 degrees Celsius not his enemy, they had also become his greatest helpers. He summoned a flaming door 100 meters deep in the magma and released hundreds and thousands of flaming creatures, allowing them to freely scatter in the huge crater. With an endless supply of fire elemental energy, the flame gate could last longer, allowing more fire creatures to come from the distant fire elemental plane to this remote Invicta plane. But it was a pity that this type of summoning flame gate would always be one way. If these fire elementals really came to Invicta plane, it would be extremely difficult for them to return to their familiar fire elemental plane. Unless they had autonomous intelligence like Sindar the Flaming Tiger and could use their own power to open a small flame passage back to the fire elemental plane, they could only wait to die of old age in Invicta plane. After setting up the flame gate, Grim released an elemental magic machine, allowing it to quickly recover from its injuries. It had to be said that the Grade 4 Holy Knight Adakali was indeed terrifying. Carly's sword strike was indeed terrifying, almost splitting its body in half. If not for the elemental magic machine blocking the sword, it would have been enough to shatter Grim's body of fire, and then use the power of holy light in the sword to purify his unprotected soul. Grade 4 creatures were indeed not to be underestimated. Even the holy knights that Grim looked down on had the power to kill in one blow once they reached Grade 4. Moreover, it was said that Adakali was still heavily injured, and was not at his peak. Based on this, he was probably even more terrifying when he was at his peak. If that was the case, his strength at his peak was probably even more terrifying. Chapter 978. In less than a quarter of an hour, the two sorcerers had reached the vicinity of the volcano. Looking at the billowing gray smoke and the assaulting heat wave, their expressions couldn't help but turn ugly. The other party was a famous legendary fire magus. Although his reputation was not well known in the outer realm, as hunters among magi, they would not make the mistake of underestimating their enemy. Katie was a famous grade 3 magus, but because of a moment of carelessness and arrogance, she had fallen into the hands of the natives. If not for the giant serpent wizard Natagu reaching an agreement with the grade 4 holy knight in time, Katie would have lost her life in this desolate and lowly plain. The agreement clearly stated that the 300 sorcerers would not invade the Invic Plain and would even help the Holy Knights fight against the Deceit Witches. Of course, in exchange, the Paladin faction had to provide them with assistance in hunting down Grimm. It was because of this agreement that the Grade 4 Holy Knight let Katie go. With the help of the 300 sorcerers, he managed to escape from Haskin City to Hezath City. After finding traces of the Fire Wizard in Hezath City, the 300 sorcerers would not let go of such a good opportunity. They followed the Fire Wizard all the way to this terrifying volcano. Even a sorcerer would have a headache fighting a Fire Wizard in such a place. The restraints of the environment were simply too unsolvable. If they were not careful, it would not be surprising for the two of them to die here. However, the giant serpent wizard Atagu and the psionic warlock Benija were not easy to deal with. Since the inside of the volcano was so dangerous, and it was hard to say who would win, it was better not to attack. The two of them set up tents near the mouth of the volcano and set up a small campsite, looking like they were going to stay there for a long time. This time, it was Grimm's weak spot. They could afford to wait, but Grimm could not. No, to be more precise, the Deceit Witches could not. If the materials to repair the Witchcraft Circle could not be delivered in time, the native Holy Knights could easily destroy the Witch Tower without any reinforcements. Logically, Grimm did not have to risk his life to help the Deceit Witches. However, without the long-distance teleportation formation, Grimm would have to go through a lot of trouble to return to the Sorcerer World. However, the three hunting sorcerers did not seem to have such concerns. After 2 days of confrontation near the crater, Guinevere the poisonous woman also hurried over. This caused the pressure on Grimm to become heavier. Originally, the plague spirit Remy had planned to join Grimm, but considering that the special environment of the volcano was not suitable for Remy to display his strength, Grimm declined. Just as Grimm was hesitating whether he should continue to defend the place or take the risk to break out of the encirclement, the heavily injured Katie arrived. At the hands of Grimm and the Tier 4 Divine Knight, Katie had suffered severe injuries. Her limbs were severed, and her mechanical witchcraft had shattered. Such serious injuries could only be truly healed after returning to the Magus world or the Outlands. Here, he could barely treat the injuries on the surface. The severed limbs had all been reattached, and the damaged mechanical heart could barely function. Therefore, the furious Katie rushed to the volcano camp and joined in the encirclement of the Fire Witches. With her injuries, she could barely maintain her intermediate grade 3 strength at the primary grade 3. She could still act as a secondary attacker. Her participation in the battle had completely extinguished Grimm's thoughts of escaping. If he stayed in the volcano, he might be able to take on many enemies by himself. However, if he was forced out of the volcano, none of the hunting sorcerers would be easy to deal with. As for Witcherina and the materials to repair the spell formation, they were no longer important compared to his life. For the first time in his life, Grimm was forced into a dangerous situation, and he could not do anything to escape. Grimm had already rushed out of the crater countless times. With his back against the lava pool, he fought the 4 hunting sorcerers in a frenzy. Unfortunately, apart from wreaking havoc in the volcano area, he could not defeat or kill any one of them. Every time Grim rushed out, his main opponent was the giant serpent wizard, Natagu. Nataga's fighting style was very simple. He transformed into a terrifying giant serpent that was more than 20 meters long and covered in purplish-black scales. This giant serpent had the unique long-life force of snakes, as well as a terrifying sound wave attack. This kind of sound wave attack was one of the more unpopular spells in the magic system, so there were relatively few defensive spells that could counter it. Sound wave attacks were famous for breaking through defenses. Even the sturdy body of the elemental magic machine could not completely defend against it. Therefore, the giant serpent wizard Natagu alone was enough to pin down both Grim and the elemental magic machine. As for the other two witches, one was good at using poison, while the other was good at controlling minds. They greatly affected Grim in the intense battle. Whenever Grim showed a flaw in the battle, Katie, who had been looking for an opening, would cut to his side and use the most violent attack to break through his defense. Most of the time, Katie didn't mind exchanging blows with Grim. This was something that hurt Grim the most. If it wasn't for Sodden's divine ring, Grim would not have been able to survive such a terrifying attack. Grim slowly opened his eyes in a secret cave under the lava pool. The cave was only about 20 square meters in size. Apart from a simple stone bed, there were no other items or furnishings. Miniature flame spell symbols were inlaid on the rock walls around the entrance, emitting misty fiery light that blocked the thick lava outside the cave. The elemental magic machine was guarding the entrance of the cave motionlessly, its compound eyes projecting multiple frequencies of light waves, firmly monitoring the movements in the nearby lava sea. Only when Grim completely woke up did the elemental magic machine retreat to the side of the cave and return to its normal state of alertness. The first thing Grim did after waking up was to quickly communicate with the AI chip. He had set up numerous fire traps around the crater of the volcano. If the hunting wizards wanted to sneak in, they would definitely trigger Grim's trap. When that happened, it would be time for him to hunt them down. Unfortunately, it was unknown if they were intimidated by Grim's reputation or if they were overly cautious. No matter how many flaws Grim revealed, they were not willing to step into the lava pool. This meant that most of Grim's traps were useless. Other than the fixed fire traps, the magma pool was also filled with all kinds of strange fire creatures of different forms and species. They had come from the fire elemental plane and were under Grim's control. They had become Grim's spies and minions. It was a pity that the strongest of these flame creatures was only at the peak of Grade 1. They could be used as cannon fodder, but it was wishful thinking to use them to chase away the hunting magi. Since the hunting magi do not dare to come and find trouble with me, I'll go and find trouble with you. After a deep sleep, Grim recovered from his injuries and fatigue from the previous battle. He brought his elemental magic machine and the flame creatures out of the lava pool. At this moment, there was only the sole warlock Benigia guarding the crater. Just as she was bored to death, she used her mental waves to sense the movements around the crater. The lava that was originally flowing quietly suddenly started boiling. Following that, a large amount of flame energy rose from the bottom of the lava pool and rushed towards the top of the crater. It's here again. Covering her red lips with her delicate hand, Benigia let out a small yawn and stretched her body. Only then did she extend her spiritual power towards the huge flame energy. Before the enemies could rush out of the lava pool, she had already used her powerful psionic ability to detect the number and level of the enemies. Hey, you guys come over quickly. That fire magus seems to be looking for trouble again. As Benigia's voice echoed in the temporary camp, the three hunting magi came out of their tents. They rubbed their sleepy eyes and cursed as they flew towards the crater. Just as they arrived at the crater, Grim and his subordinates rushed out of the lava pool and appeared in the crater. What's wrong, kid? Did the kiss of death not teach you a lesson? How dare you come out again today? The giant serpent Magus Nataga laughed coldly. His gaze pierced through the dense red light and landed on Grim's left hand. There, at the edge of the palm, two deep teeth marks could still be clearly seen. The flesh and skin around it had already turned black, and there was a faint smell of bitter tea. This was a killing move that Natagu had left behind for Grim in the previous battle. During close combat, he would suddenly cast the terrifying kiss of death and split his body into a serpentine shadow that could ignore defense to attack his opponent. If the opponent was not aware, the serpentine shadow could even drill into the opponent's body and devour their soul. Fortunately, Grim had the Chip's warning. He blocked his chest with his palm in time to prevent the attack from penetrating his body. However, because of this, Grim was also infected with the terrifying venom of the giant serpent. He had no choice but to sleep to neutralize the venom. Now that the opponent had brought up the past, Grim's expression turned grim. He then sneered, "Mere venom can't kill me. However, I'm still not satisfied that I didn't eat a barbecued giant serpent last time. What do you say, Lord Natagu?" Natagu was currently wearing a purple robe. Obvious burn marks could be seen on his exposed skin. Even with his rank 3 bloodline Magus physique, he could not completely heal these external injuries. This was enough to show how serious the burns he had received in the previous battle were. Chapter 979. The first wave to rush onto the battlefield were the flaming creatures that served as cannon fodder. Low-grade fire elementals, fire spirits, giant fire spirits, fire wolves, lava hounds, flame beasts, fire giants, all sorts of flaming creatures rushed out from Grim's back, roaring as they charged towards the 4 wizards standing at the crater. Before they even arrived, a wave of fire spells had already engulfed their position. Although the attack looked powerful, it was a pity that there were no powerful fire spells among them. They were just the innate abilities of the flaming creatures, most of which were elemental fireballs. Purple light flashed in Benika's eyes, and an invisible mind wave swept across the air, detonating the elemental fireballs in advance. From afar, it looked like the 4 wizards were facing an explosion of flames, and the energy waves were incredibly strong. However, by the time the shockwave formed by the fireball that exploded in advance reached the Magi, it was already an arrow at the end of its flight. It couldn't even shake the seemingly thin protective force field on the surface of the Magi's body, not to mention injuring them in the slightest. After 2 consecutive waves of useless flame attacks, the group of flame creatures had already rushed to the vicinity of the crater. However, before they could disperse and surround the wizards, Katie stepped forward and pushed forward with one hand. 5 metal blades flew out like butterflies and blocked the way of the wizards. The blade wheel whistled, and the flaming creatures were shattered. The flaming creature only had the strength of an initial Tier 1 flame creature. It did not even have the chance to struggle before it was sliced into countless pieces and scattered into flames. The next batch was minced into pieces, and the next batch was minced into pieces again. The 5-sided blade wheel was controlled by Katie as if it was her own arm, and it whistled through the flaming creatures. Every time they charged forward, they would leave a trail of flames behind them. No matter how fast and agile the flaming creatures were, there was no way they could break through Katie's metal blade wheel. However, under the cover of the flaming creatures, the elemental magic machines charged forward, swinging their steel fists at Katie. Amidst the howling wind created by Lin Li's fists, the violent magical energy followed him like a shadow, stirring up numerous small elemental vortexes. Katie was a mechanical sorceress. Although she was more agile, her strength was not low. Therefore, when faced with the violent attack of the elemental magical equipment, she did not dodge immediately. Instead, she retracted her 5-sided blade wheel and merged it with the 2 metal spikes in her hand. It was as if a fierce metal storm was crazily tangling with the steel arm and the iron fist. While attacking the enemies, Katie's figure fluttered, and she used the elemental magic machine's iron fists to retreat. In the eyes of an outsider, it looked like Katie had been sent flying by a punch from an elemental magic machine and had suffered a loss. However, the truth was that Katie was completely unscathed, while the elemental magic equipment's metallic right arm was filled with fine and deep scratches and dents. However, With the thickness of the elemental magic equipment's metal arm, this kind of injury wouldn't affect its combat strength. Thus, like a leopard playing with a black bear, Katie allowed the elemental magic machine to pounce left and right. Her fists whistled through the air, and waves of mana, shockwaves, came one after another. Katie turned into a series of afterimages and quickly circled around the elemental magic machine. The metal spikes in her hands and the spinning metal blades cut the elemental magic machine's body, causing sparks to fly everywhere. While Katie was being pushed back by the elemental magic machinery, the flaming creatures that were blocking the way finally broke through the blade formation and roared as they charged at the wizards. The one who took over Katie's position was the psionic warlock Benija. She didn't seem to shout or make a posture, but her delicate figure took a step forward. The huge amethyst on her forehead overflowed with invisible ripples that were hard to be seen by the naked eye. The charging body of the flaming creature that was swept by the mind ripple suddenly became sluggish and then disintegrated for no reason. Huge fireballs exploded near the mouth of the volcano, blasting the loose volcanic rocks into pieces and rolling down the slope into the lava pool. If Katie's massacre was considered normal, then the psionic warlock Vanija's massacre was incomprehensible. Even Grim, who was holding the rear, could only rely on his multi-sensory vision to see the existence of the mind ripple. However, he didn't know how the mind ripple destroyed the core of the flaming creature's consciousness. From his point of view, the flaming creatures rushed forward one after another and mysteriously self-destructed. The violent elemental flames turned into balls of fire, engulfing the entire front line of the battlefield. Grim didn't plan to summon the Thunder Dragon arms. It wasn't because he was being arrogant, but it was meaningless. Every time the Thunder Dragon Armstrong appeared, the four hunter wizards would turn tail and flee without hesitation, using the vast battlefield to buy time to summon the Tier 3 dragon. According to the laws of the plane, the Thunder Dragon arms didn't come to the Invicta plane through the planar portal. Instead, it was summoned by the dragon contract between it and Grim. As such, the amount of time it could stay in the Invicta plane was limited by the laws of the plane. Even with the dragon contract between Grim and Grim, Grim could only maintain arm's existence for a quarter of an hour. This amount of time was more than enough to finish a battle, but it wasn't enough to chase after the four wizards who were avoiding him. As for using the Thunder Dragon arm's power to escape, Grim had thought of this before, and the four wizards were even hoping he would do it. However, if he left this place, he would lose the protection of the lava pool. To be honest, Grim didn't have the confidence to defend against their attacks. Therefore, after summoning arms once or twice, Grim completely gave up on the idea. He began to seriously engage the wizard hunters in a positional battle. Seeing that his subordinates had already charged forward, Grim transformed into a fire giant without hesitation. He raised his hand and summoned a flaming cloud that filled the sky. Faced with the powerful attacks of a Tier 3 fire shaman, the four hunting sorcerers could no longer maintain their calm and leisurely attitude. They carefully dodged the lava fireballs and meteor showers, doing their best to evade Grim's attacks. He didn't know why, but the might of Grim's fire spell was shockingly strong. Moreover, it carried light damage that ignored defense. However, the biggest headache for the hunting wizards was the fact that Grim could change the effects of his fire spell as he pleased. Cold flames, fire poison, explosion, all sorts of strange magic effects could torture people to the point of insanity. Fire poison was one thing, but with Guinevere around, any kind of poison could be neutralized. However, explosion and cold flames were too difficult to deal with. Besides the high temperature, Grim's fire spell could also explode at any time, which was too annoying. Most of the time, Katie would be disrupted by the sudden explosion, forcing her to clash with the elemental magic machine. If she was unlucky, she would be frozen on the spot by the cold flames. Even with Katie's powerful strength, she would still be pummeled by the elemental magic machine. Katie's strength was at its lowest due to the continuous injuries she had sustained. She would be in a weak state before returning to the Outlands for treatment. Therefore, when they saw Grimm step onto the battlefield. The four wizards immediately split up the work. Snake Wizard Natagu and Psychic Warlock Benija were in charge of dealing with the Fire Wizard Grimm, while Katie and Poison Woman Guinevere were in charge of restraining the Elemental Magic Machine. Both sides used their own special techniques and fought in the volcanic crater that was 5 miles in diameter. In the previous battles, the 400 wizards had tried to use Katie to stall the Elemental Magic Machine, while the remaining 3 wizards attacked the Fire Wizard. They wanted to use this method to kill Grimm as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Grimm was surprisingly tough, and he had the pool of lava behind him to support him. Therefore, even when he was surrounded by the 3 wizards, he still stood firm. In comparison, Katie was the weakest link in the group. The 3 wizards had yet to defeat Grimm, but Katie had almost won the duel with the Elemental Magic Machine. Because of that battle, Katie's injuries worsened, and she became weaker and weaker. However, apart from Katie, the Psionic Warlock and the Old Poison Hag were not suitable to deal with the Elemental Magic device, and it was impossible for them to. Snake Wizard Atagu was the main force of the battle, so he could not take over the Elemental Magic Machine. Otherwise, once Grimm unleashed his full power, the threat he posed to them would be simply too great. Therefore, the 4 of them had no choice but to use this gentle method to fight against the Fire Wizard. It had to be said that as the leader of the 4-man team, the giant snake wizard was terrifyingly powerful. Once he transformed into the Black Mamba snake, he had tough snake scales that were comparable to the Elemental Magic Machine, and his magic resistance was not inferior to that of a giant dragon. Relying on his powerful magic resistance, the giant snake wizard could even rush into the pool of lava and engage in close combat with the fire giant that Grimm had transformed into. Every time both sides unleashed their full strength, the Gansu's volcano was like an exploding barrel, violently spewing out streams of scorching lava and volcanic ash that blotted out the sky and covered the sun. Following the earth-shattering rumbles, the entire volcanic area became a terrifying place where no life could approach, as if doomsday had arrived. Chapter 980. The reason why the Magus War on Mount Gansus did not cause too many casualties was mainly because there were few people in the vicinity of the volcano. However, ever since the Magi broke into the place, Gansus volcano exploded every 3 days and erupted every 5 days. The thick volcanic ash that it spewed out covered the sky and the sun, turning the area within a radius of hundreds of miles into a land of death. The Gansus volcano was located in the center of the Zambez Empire, so it was impossible for any abnormalities to occur there without alerting the upper echelons of the empire. But no matter what the Magi did there, the Zambeze Empire seemed to have gone blind, turning a deaf ear to it and turning a blind eye to it. Under the command of the Holy Knights, a large number of the Empire's regular army even moved some of the people near Mount Gansus, completely marking the area as a forbidden zone. Of course, what they announced to the public was that Mount Gansus had unexpectedly entered an active period, and in order to not cause any casualties to the citizens of the Empire, they moved the local villagers away. As for what exactly happened in Mount Gansus, only a few high-ranking officials of the Empire and some high-ranking Holy Knights truly knew what happened there. Although it sounded a little shameful to allow a group of foreign wizards to fight to the death in his territory. However, considering that the group of evil witches in the southwest had not been eliminated, the Empire and the Holy Knights agreed that it was not appropriate to involve this group of witches in the planar war. And so, the days passed by, 5 days, 10 days, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. On the 25th of November, half a year after Grimm and the others passed through the wormhole and arrived in the Envic dimension, the witch tower that stood in the southwest of the Zambeze Empire, De Pere Highlands, finally collapsed. Grimm had obtained this information through the plague poison spirit Remy, who was wandering outside. Ever since Grimm had given him the order to roam freely, Remy had chosen to roam around the borders of the Zambeze Empire, pillaging and purging a village every now and then in order to maintain and replenish his plague corps. In the past 6 months, Remy had managed to raise an army of thousands of plague soldiers. Unfortunately, a tall tree attracts the wind. Very soon, a large group of holy knights surrounded and attacked him. Remy, who wasn't suited for direct combat, ran into the paladins who specialized in purification. Not even a tier 3 golden knight had to make a move to scare him away. It led the remaining 100 or so elites and fled into the wild forest, turning to wreak havoc on the native magical beasts of the Embark plain. The native monsters didn't have a holy knight who was good at purifying, so Remy was like a fish in water. Once again, the plague army's numbers swelled. With an inexhaustible source of troops, Remy used the vast wilderness as his base, and from time to time, he would come out of the forest to harass the human villages around him, slowly honing his skills. In just 2 months, Remy had created his own plague emissary, a grade 2 plague servant of his own. This was a strange creature that was good at concocting, creating, and spreading plagues. Their individual combat strength was not very strong, and they were even weaker than low-level poison corpses. However, they had the ability to continuously produce plague spores and could also enhance or adjust the magical characteristics of the plague spores according to the different enemies. This ability made them the best helpers for Remy to manage and strengthen the Legion of Pestilence. Many times, a grade 2 plague emissary could be thrown into an area rich in biological resources, and Remy didn't even need to intervene. The plague emissary could quickly raise a considerable plague army for him. Externally, these plague emissaries were abnormally ugly. They had sickly dark green skin, sticky and slippery body fluids, and terrifying bubbles that constantly swelled all over their bodies. Yellow and green plague bacteria could be seen growing inside them. Every time a bubble burst, it would release a deadly plague with terrifying destructive power into the air. It could be said that wherever the plague emissaries went, the air would always be filled with terrifying yellow clouds that wouldn't disperse even after a long time. All life forms infected by the yellow clouds would be forcibly modified by the plague. The weaker ones would be decomposed into more plague spores and released into the air. As for those with more unique life forms, if they could survive the transformation, they would be modified into carriers. In other words, low-level poison corpses. Meanwhile, the plague creatures that were sacrificed to the lives of thousands of natives became stronger and more elite as the slaughter went on. Paladin squads, the Empire's regular army, local militia, mercenary squads, and all sorts of local armed forces. Remy's Legion of Pestilence and these mortal enemies launched a frenzied massacre in various towns, villages, wilderness, forests, and swamps. Eliminate the weak and leave the strong. Slaughter and evolution. It could be said that any plague creature that could survive in such an environment would become a terrifying elite leader. There are even lower-tier plague creatures that had evolved 4 or 5 times. It was precisely because of this group of plague subordinates that Remy became a huge hidden danger in the northwestern border of the Zambese Empire. If not for the deceit witches holding back most of the Empire's forces, there would have been high-ranking paladins leading teams to encircle and annihilate him. However, on the 25th of November, Remy's good days finally came to an end. The witch tower that had been standing tall in the Dabri Highlands had been breached by a tier 4 holy knight. Even the large group of deception witches had fled in all directions, becoming a group of stray dogs. After Remy received this news, he first sent it to Grimm through their soul connection. Then, he led a large group of subordinates and plunged into the depths of the forest, never to be seen again. If he still dared to cause trouble in the Zambese Empire's territory, the terrifying grade 4 holy knight would probably appear in the team that would encircle him. This was a powerful fellow that even his master didn't dare to provoke. As for Grimm, it was better to stay away. During this half a year, Grimm was trapped in the Gansus volcano by the 4 hunter wizards. With the volcano backing him, the 4 hunter wizards did not dare to go in and cause trouble, and Grimm did not dare to leave the volcano. Thus, the two sides confronted each other angrily. After hearing the news that the witch tower had been destroyed, Grimm, who had been restless and wanted to defeat the 4 hunter wizards, finally calmed down and hid in the depths of the volcano. Since he could not defeat the enemy and did not dare to leave the volcano, there was no point in continuing the battle. It was better to calm down and see how long these damned bastards were planning to stay here. However, what Grimm did not expect was that the 4 hunting sorcerers were surprisingly tenacious. They guarded the crater of the volcano, with at least one wizard guarding it every day. The rest of the wizards either hid in small camps to rest or went to the human towns to buy some food and water. Although a Tier 3 sorcerer's need for these things had reached an unimaginable level, food and water were still an essential physiological supplement. Originally, the 4 hunting wizards wanted to use this to force Grimm out of the volcano. However, what they did not expect was that Grimm had a large amount of fire dragon meat in his storage ring. If he ate it sparingly, it would be enough for Grimm to survive for 10 years. As for drinking water, Grimm even had a magic wand. Although there was not much water in the molten cavern, where the fire elemental energy was extremely dense, it was enough for him to use alone. Thus, the two sides were in a deadlock, one on the inside and one on the outside. Since the outside route was cut off, Grimm did not think too much about it. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity to live in seclusion, Grimm hid in the molten cavern that he had dug under the lava pool. Using the simple facilities and poor resources, he once again cut his soul and placed a portion of it into the spirit-gathering crystal. This action also caused the aura of his soul to suddenly weaken. According to the AI chip's assessment, Grimm's soul had shrunk by more than a third, and this had severely affected his battle prowess. However, the great risk came with a great reward. The spirit-gathering crystal was filled with the pure holy light of hundreds of muddle-headed souls. The portion of Grimm's soul was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. It could devour and dissolve the ownerless holy light at will. Grimm's soul first devoured the holy light of the Black Iron Knights. Only after its own strength was strengthened did it slowly attack the holy light of the Silver Iron Knights. And its ultimate goal, of course, was the only golden holy light in the soul-gathering crystal. While his soul devoured the holy light, Grimm once again initiated another battle in order to hide the fact that his soul had suddenly weakened by a third. He used a large number of fire creatures to attack the enemy's campsite. Of course, Grimm's abnormality could not be hidden from the powerful senses of the Soul Warlock. The 4 hunter wizards had different opinions about the sudden weakening of the Fire Shaman's spiritual force. Katie and the Soul Warlock Benija both believed that the Fire Shaman's carelessness in meditation had caused a backlash, which caused his soul to weaken. This was the best time for them to attack. However, the giant snake wizard Natagu and the old poison hag both believed that this was a trap set by the Fire Shaman to lure them in. Otherwise, how could a perfectly fine rank 3 Magus soul suddenly become so weak? Natagu and the others could not be blamed for thinking too much. No wizard dared to play the game of cutting souls like Grimm did when he was surrounded by enemies. If he met a few reckless and hot-tempered people who charged into the lava pool, it would be extremely difficult for Grimm to repel the enemy's attack with his weakened soul. However, Grimm, who had always been bold, had gradually become familiar with and understood the 4 hunter wizards after half a year of contact. Therefore, after the AI chip's in-depth assessment of their personalities, Grimm dared to do something that was almost suicidal. Chapter 981. Magus World, Tower of Destiny. Dragging her weary body, Alice had just stepped out of the astrology hall when the little elf, Helen, rushed toward her in a swaying manner. Oh no, that bad woman is here again. Helen circled around Alice's body 3 times before finally stopping in front of her, seething with anger. She waved her hand and cast Life Bloom and energy return on Alice. The former restored life, force, and stamina, while the latter restored spiritual force. With these 2 blessings, Alice would be able to recover from her current state of mental exhaustion to her peak state in less than half of the rest time. For most magi who valued their time, this was the best thing that could be done. Elemental fairies were valued by so many magi because of their value. Bad woman? Alice was slightly startled, but she immediately understood that it was Mary who had come. As the owner of the Tower of Destiny, Mary could not enter the upper levels without Alice's permission. Hence, even though she was extremely tired, Alice still dragged her sore body to the third floor of the tower to see the furious Mary. "What the hell are you doing? Where did Grim go?" Mary asked impatiently. "The Fabris family, Inham family, Ranner family, and the Fabris family have all come looking for us. They're asking Grim to come out and resolve the conflicts in their territories." Every member of their family had a Tier 4 sorcerer overseeing them. They definitely couldn't deal with them in one go like they had in the past. Should we fight or make peace? Grim has to come out and make the decision. These days, Mary had been sitting in the family's internal affairs. She was annoyed to the point that smoke was coming out of her ears, nostrils, and ears. Gargamel and Winley had managed the internal affairs in an orderly manner, and the family's development was also becoming more and more prosperous. However, in the midst of the treacherous whirlpool of power, the external challenges the Crimson family faced did not decrease at all. With the appearance of a few high-ranked magi from the Crimson family, the external pressure they faced increased, and it was as if a dark cloud was pressing down on them. Not to mention anything else, just the conflicts and disputes that occurred around the Crimson family's territory numbered in the tens. Perhaps some noble family had been assassinated in the Crimson territory, or a noble neighboring the Crimson territory had started a war over a small matter, or some faction had accused the Crimson territory of harboring their fugitives. Although most of these matters were worldly affairs in the Crimson territory and did not involve the Magus families, the Magus family was still in the Crimson territory. However, with so many disputes and troubles erupting at the same time, Gargamel and Winnie, who were in charge of the family's affairs, felt that something was wrong. It had to be known that the last time the Crimson family started a sorcerer war was less than 40 years ago. That time, they had forced the allied forces of the five families to flee in defeat. Now, there was another external force that had set their sights on the Crimson family. Under Mary's command, the gnome faction of the Crimson family quickly obtained intelligence. This time, the ones who had their eyes on the Crimson family were not the small families or organizations from the past, but the few large Magus families that could shake the world with a stomp of their feet. The Fabres family, the Intome family, the Radner family. These illustrious names were like pearls mixed into a pile of glass in the scattered Tower Forest region of the Central Continent, extremely prestigious and glorious. There were hundreds and thousands of Magus families in the Central Continent, but no matter how much they rose and fell and fought, the ones that stood at the forefront were still the five large families. The Fabres family, the Intome family, and the Radner family were three of these families. Now, even they had their eyes on the Crimson family. As the only rank 3 Magus in the family, Mary immediately felt a heavy pressure that was as heavy as a mountain. Mary was adept at fighting and killing, but she was not adept at resolving enmity in the midst of drinking and dancing in private. Hence, the Dragon Man Zachary and the insect Lich Bliss ran around under Mary's orders, using their ferocious strength to force back wave after wave of unknown enemies. However, these worldly nobles and low-ranked Magus families were only the lackeys and fangs sent by the enemy behind the scenes to interfere with the Crimson family. Even if they were beaten back, they still could not get rid of the mastermind behind the scenes. If the Crimson family did not have the protection of the rank 4 magical golem dragon, perhaps some families would have already declared war on them. It was because of these hidden worries that Mary was even more eager to find Grim. Unfortunately, she only knew that Alice had gone to the Flame Monarch a while ago, and then Grim had mysteriously disappeared. As for Grim's true movements, she had no idea. That was why she had rushed to the Tower of Destiny angrily to question Alice about Grim's whereabouts. Alice only had a vague idea of Grim's predicament in Invictplane. However, she did not dare to divulge such simple information to Mary. It was for no other reason than the powerful enemy that was constantly watching her. Without any clues, it would be difficult for Alice to understand everything that happened in Invic Plain. That woman would not know more than she did, nor would she be able to probe deeper. However, if Alice casually divulged the situation there, even if she used destiny spells to cover it up, she would not be able to stop the other party from understanding her trump card through the development of the world line. This was the strange and treacherous aspect of the struggle between the Witches of Destiny. Hence, Alice could only use a vague tone to tell Mary that Grimm was temporarily trapped in a different plane. However, he was safe and only needed to wait patiently for a period of time before he could return. Such rough information, naturally, could not satisfy Mary's anxious heart. However, considering that Grimm had always trusted and respected Alice's choices, Mary suppressed her annoyance and left angrily. Alice stood stiffly in the guest hall for a moment before sighing faintly and returning to her residence. To be honest, the length and difficulty of this confrontation had completely exceeded Grimm's expectations. 5 years. 5 long years had actually been wasted in this remote and desolate land of another world. In these 5 years, Grimm had charged out of the lava pool countless times to fight to the death with the 4 hunting magi. However, no matter how many tricks he used, he could not seriously injure any of the 4 magi. In comparison, it would be extremely difficult for the 4 hunting wizards to kill Grimm. It was just wishful thinking. Both sides confronted each other fiercely. In the beginning, there would be a fierce battle every 3 to 5 days. In the middle, there would be a battle every half a month, and then it would be a battle every month. Both sides seemed to know that they could not do anything to the other party. Therefore, rather than saying that the battle was a battle, it would be more accurate to say that they came out to exercise out of boredom. Grimm was trapped under the volcano, so he could only open up a small laboratory there. Sometimes, when he was so busy that he forgot the time and did not come out for a month or 2, the 4 hunting magi would take the initiative to visit him. Just like that, the 2 of them went back and forth. Unknowingly, 5 years had passed in Mount Gansus. In these 5 years, although Grimm had been tortured to the point of exhaustion, the 4 hunting magi did not have an easy time either. For a bloodline wizard who boasted of his extraordinary potential, being trapped in the Invic Plain for 5 years was simply a huge torture for him. The magical energy in the environment here could not be compared to that in the sorcerer world or the Outland. Meditating here every day could barely restore one's wizard power, but it was wishful thinking to want to make any progress in his mind. This also meant that the 5 years of Natagu and the others' time had been wasted. Besides, being trapped in the volcano and unable to leave, they could not collect any useful wizard resources, let alone experiment with witchcraft. Therefore, while Grimm was physically and mentally exhausted, Natagu and the other 3 were also suffering from the same torment. However, since they were entrusted by that sir, and it was apparent that they were unwilling to be unable to capture and kill an inconspicuous fire wizard, they could only endure it day by day. But with the passage of time, the situation in Invic Bitwall had obviously undergone some unexpected changes. The Holy Knights, who had been recuperating for a long time, were eager to try again. In these 5 years, the Holy Knights overthrew the Witch Tower and hunted down the remaining witches all over the world. With their hard work, it could be said that the results were fruitful and outstanding. Most of the deception witches who escaped were either captured or killed by them. Even if there were some who slipped through the net, they would disappear and live in seclusion, not daring to come out and cause trouble again. Once the pressure brought by the witches was gone, the group of foreign wizards entrenched near the volcano became very conspicuous. Although Natagu and the Grade 4 Holy Knight had a cooperation agreement, with the disappearance of the Deception Witches, it seemed that there was no longer a need to continue the agreement. Therefore, during this time, there were suddenly a few more people near the volcano. 5 groups of adventurers had entered the area and died to the poison of the old poison woman. One day, the psionic warlock Benija, who was in charge of purchasing daily necessities, returned to the camp covered in blood. She also brought back some bad news. Due to the perennial eruption of the volcano, the surrounding towns and villages were all barren. Benigia disguised herself and went to a small city 170 miles away to buy the supplies. However, there was a group of high-grade holy knights stationed in the desolate town with a population of less than 7,000. They also conducted strict checks and divine spell tests on people who entered and left the town. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.